The wind howled through the cold, empty expanse, carrying whispers of ancient battles, of gods and monsters locked in a timeless struggle. Every gust of wind seemed to echo the clash of swords, the roars of beasts, the cries of warriors. For the Norse, battle wasn't just an event, it was everything. It was life, it was death, it was glory, and it was fate. In the land of the Norse gods, the gods were as fierce and untamed as the world they ruled. The stories of their battles, struggles, and triumphs weren't just legends passed down through generations, they were the very heartbeat of a people. These gods weren't sitting in some distant ivory tower, removed from the world below. They lived among storms, fire, and ice, and their wars shaped the very fabric of their existence. Odin, the All-Father, with his one eye that saw all, understood the cost of battle. He knew that each fight, each clash, wasn't just about winning, it was about sacrifice, honor, and destiny. The very air seemed to tremble with anticipation whenever he appeared. His long beard, his cloak that billowed like the night sky, and the raven perched on his shoulders symbolized power and wisdom. Odin wasn't afraid to face death. He wasn't afraid to stare down the fates. To him, war was a way of life. A way of forging greatness from the fire of conflict. Beside him stood Thor, his thunderous son, whose hammer Mjolnir could crush mountains with a single strike. Thor's battles were legendary, against giants, serpents, and creatures beyond comprehension. His wrath was as fierce as the storms he controlled. With every battle, Thor's strength wasn't just physical. It was a force of nature, a storm unleashed, leaving chaos in its wake. But it wasn't just the gods who fought. The Valkyries, fierce and beautiful, flew above the battlefields, choosing which warriors would live and which would die. Their wings whispered through the winds, their armor shining bright as they descended, selecting only the bravest to join Odin in Valhalla. They were the gatekeepers of fate, and their presence on the battlefield was a sign that the fight wasn't over yet. In their eyes, there was no fear, no hesitation. Only the drive to honor the fallen, to guide them to the halls of the greatest warriors. And then there were the giants, monstrous beings, embodiments of chaos, constantly waging war against the gods. From the cold, jagged mountains of Jotunheim, they came, their eyes burning with hatred. The gods and giants fought for control of the world. It wasn't just about power, it was about survival. When the giants attacked, it was a reminder that the balance between order and chaos was fragile, that no one, be they god or monster, was immune from destruction. Each god had their own story, their own battle to fight. Freya, the goddess of love and war, had to prove that beauty and strength weren't mutually exclusive. She could wield a sword as gracefully as she could weave spells of desire. She fought not only for herself, but for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Her power came from within, from a deep well of strength that made her one of the most formidable warriors of all. In the shadows, Loki, the trickster god, wove his webs of deceit, his actions unpredictable and his motives mysterious. Loki didn't fight in the same way as the others. He didn't wield a sword or a hammer. Instead, he fought with words, with plots, and with chaos. But make no mistake, his battles were as destructive as any. His role in the fate of gods and men was one of betrayal, one that would shape the destiny of all at the end of time. The gods didn't fight for the sake of fighting. There was always a reason, a consequence. Battle, for them, was the ultimate test of their strength, courage, and will. It was the only way to achieve glory. The only way to make their names echo through the halls of Valhalla. It was their path to immortality. But these weren't just battles between gods and giants. The fate of the world hung in the balance. It was a world where survival meant fighting against the forces of destruction, where every blow struck had meaning, where every loss could mean the end of everything. The Norse saw their world as a battlefield, a place where only the strongest survived and only the bravest triumphed. War was a reflection of their lives. There was no room for weakness, no room for hesitation. A warrior's worth was determined by his battle, by his ability to face death without flinching, to stand tall in the face of overwhelming odds. The gods were no different. Each battle they fought added to their legend, each victory or loss shaped their destiny, and their stories became the very foundation of the Norse spirit. It wasn't just about war, though. It was about the belief that a warrior's soul was destined to join Odin in Valhalla, where they would feast and fight until the end of time. But that end, that final battle, Ragnarok, was always looming in the distance. It was the battle to end all battles, the cataclysm that would consume the world. But even then, the gods fought, knowing that their death would bring about the rebirth of the world. The significance of battle in Norse mythology is not just a matter of bloodshed. It's about honor, sacrifice, and destiny. The warriors fought not for fame or riches, but for the promise of a glorious afterlife, for the chance to sit at Odin's table and drink mead beside the greatest of heroes. Each battle was a chance to prove themselves worthy of that honor. Each clash was a step closer to their final reward. The gods fought not because they loved battle, but because it was their fate. It was the only way they could shape their destinies, the only way they could be remembered forever. They fought because they had no other choice. Because to them, there was no greater honor than to die in battle, to fall with your sword in your hand, and to rise again, stronger than before. In the end, the story of Norse mythology is a story of war. It is a story of gods who live and die by the sword, of monsters who fight to destroy, and of heroes who will never back down, no matter the cost. It is a world where every battle matters, and every warrior's fate is tied to the outcome. And as the wind howls and the echoes of battle grow louder, one thing is clear: in the land of the Norse gods, battle is everything. There's a moment in every battle when the air feels thick, when the weight of the world hangs over the warriors, as if something beyond them, something ancient, is watching. The sound of clashing steel and screams fills the air, but in those brief, fleeting seconds, the true nature of war becomes clear. It's not just about strength. It's about destiny. In the farthest corners of the world, hidden from mortal eyes, three figures stand in silence, their hands weaving threads, their eyes unblinking as they watch. The Norns, the weavers of fate, are the ones who hold the power to shape the course of the gods and the world itself. They stand at the edge of everything, unseen, untouchable, their fingers twisting the threads of every life, every moment. Their presence is not known to the warriors below, but their influence is everywhere. When a warrior goes into battle, he does not just fight for glory or survival. He fights for his fate. The Norns have already spun the thread of his life. The question is not if he will die, but how and when. The battle rages, and with every strike, a warrior's life moves closer to the inevitable. And as the Norns watch, they see the patterns unfold, the life threads of all creatures woven into a single, tangled mess of past, present, and future. Fate is not just a passive force in the world of the Norse gods. It is the very hand that guides them, pulling the strings like a master puppeteer. Even the gods are not immune to fate. Odin, the mighty All-Father, may stand tall with his ravens at his side, his wisdom unmatched, but even he is bound by the threads spun by the Norns. His eye, the price he paid for knowledge, cannot change the course of his own fate. No amount of power can escape the threads that tie him to the world of mortality. In the quiet moments before a great battle, the gods know. They know that no matter how many enemies they slay, no matter how many victories they win, the prophecy of Ragnarok, of their final, fated war, will come. It is already written, already sealed. Thor, hammer raised high, may feel the rush of triumph in every fight, but the thunder god knows that he, too, will fall. His battle with the serpent, Jormungandr, will bring his end. The Norns don't just weave the fates of gods. They weave the fate of every warrior, every soldier, every beast in the world. When the first shield is raised, when the first sword is drawn, the Norns have already seen how the battle will unfold. They have already seen which warriors will rise, which will fall. The prophecy is set, written long before the battle begins. But this isn't a world of hopelessness. It's not a place where warriors fight for no reason, knowing that victory is impossible. In the realm of the gods, even fate can be fought, at least for a moment. The gods know that their actions matter. They know that by fighting, by facing the inevitable with honor, they shape the world in ways that no one truly understands. Each battle fought, each enemy slain, is a defiance of fate. But in the end, they know what's coming. And in that knowledge, they find a deeper, more heartbreaking strength. When the warriors are on the battlefield, with blood staining the ground and the cries of the fallen rising like a storm, the gods know that fate isn't just an enemy. It's a companion. The warriors may not see it, may not feel it in their bones, but their every movement, their every decision, is guided by the unseen hands of the Norns. Some may fight to delay the inevitable, others may fight because they've accepted it. But fate watches, always watching, and there is no escape from its grasp. And the most tragic part? The gods know that fate is not something to be conquered. It is something to be embraced. It is not just the end of their battles that matters, but the way they fought until the very last breath. Their names will live on, not because of their victories, but because of their defiance against the certainty of their doom. To face the inevitable, to know the outcome, and still stand tall, that is what it means to be a true warrior in the world of the gods. As Odin stands before his army, as Thor grips Mjolnir with all the fury of a storm, as Freyja guides her Valkyries into battle, they know that they are playing their parts in something much larger than themselves. They are moving the threads of destiny, but they are also part of it. No god, no warrior, can escape the fate that awaits them. In the quiet, when the fighting pauses, when the cries fade into the distance, the Norns continue their work. They watch as the threads of life are pulled tighter, as the lives of gods and men twist together in an endless dance of fate. They see the outcomes long before they arrive, and yet, they never interfere. Their task is not to change the world, but to shape it. To weave the lives of those who will fight, those who will die, and those who will rise again. And in the end, the threads they weave will lead to Ragnarok, the final, cataclysmic battle where the gods will face their fate and the world will burn. Even in this destruction, there is a kind of beauty. The gods, who have fought and bled and died for their honor, will meet their fate with courage. They know it's coming, but they do not run. They fight, not to change it, but to honor the life they've lived, the battles they've fought. For in the end, it's not about winning or losing. It's about how they faced what was always destined to be. And as the world burns, the Norns will stand, watching it all, their fingers weaving the final threads that will lead to the rebirth of all things. The gods, the warriors, the battles, they are all part of a greater story, one written by the hands of fate. The battlefield stretched endlessly under a gray sky, the air heavy with the scent of iron and ash. Warriors, their faces hardened by years of struggle, tightened their grips on their weapons. They knew he was watching. Above it all, shrouded in shadow and wisdom, stood Odin. The All-Father, the god of war, his one remaining eye scanning the chaos below, seeing more than any mortal could comprehend. Odin was not a god of reckless carnage. His wars were never without purpose, his strategies never random. Every clash of sword and shield, every arrow that darkened the skies, carried his mark, a plan calculated with cold precision, born of wisdom gleaned from countless sacrifices. He was the architect of victory, the weaver of chaos, and the harbinger of doom when it was required. He had paid the price for this knowledge, for the power to lead and to destroy. The roots of Yggdrasil, the great tree that connected all existence, still bore the scars of his sacrifice. He had hung himself there for 9 agonizing days and nights, pierced by his own spear, the winds howling around him like wolves. No help came, none was sought. It was only in that ultimate suffering that the runes, ancient symbols of power and wisdom, revealed themselves to him. And with them, he became something more than a god of war. He became the mind behind it, the strategist who could turn the tide of any battle, whether fought by gods or mortals. When Odin went to war, he was not just a figure of strength, he was the soul of the conflict itself. His presence inspired warriors to fight harder, to push beyond what they thought was possible. But his gift was a double-edged sword. With every blessing he gave, there was a cost. Those who fought under Odin's watchful eye often met their end on the battlefield. Their lives were the toll for glory, their deaths a sacrifice to his insatiable hunger for knowledge and power. His strategies were as ruthless as they were brilliant. In the divine wars against the Jotnar, the frost giants who sought to destroy the balance of existence, Odin's mind was the weapon that mattered most. He would send his ravens, Hugin and Munin, to scout the lands, their sharp eyes and keen minds capturing every detail. They returned with whispers of enemy movements, hidden weaknesses, and unspoken fears. Odin used every scrap of knowledge, every overlooked detail, to plan his assaults. He never fought without knowing the stakes. When he led the gods into battle, his spear, Gungnir, glimmered with a power that shook the heavens. It was said to never miss its mark, a symbol of his unerring will. But Odin didn't rely on brute force alone. His wisdom allowed him to see paths others couldn't, to turn even certain defeat into a victory with a single, devastating move. Mortals, too, felt the weight of his influence. Kings and warriors called on him before battle, sacrificing animals or even their own blood in exchange for his favor. The chosen few who bore his mark, a single eye tattooed on their skin, a silent vow of loyalty, knew what it meant. To fight for Odin was to fight knowing you were already halfway to Valhalla, the great hall where the honored dead feasted forever. His gaze was both a blessing and a curse, for once he chose you, he did not let go. But Odin was not infallible. His wisdom was paid for with a cost that never stopped rising. The weight of prophecy hung over him like a storm cloud, and he knew that every victory brought him closer to the final war, Ragnarok. He had seen it all, the fire and ice consuming the world, the gods falling one by one. And yet, he fought. Not because he could stop what was coming, but because it was his nature. To lead, to guide, to fight with everything he had, even as the shadows of his fate loomed larger. Odin's sacrifices were not just in blood but in trust. He gave one of his eyes to the well of Mimir, seeking to see what others could not. The waters showed him visions of a world torn apart, of a serpent coiling around its prey, of Fenrir, the monstrous wolf, breaking free of its chains. Every glimpse into the future was another thread tightening around his neck. And yet, he accepted it all without flinching. The wisdom he gained was worth the pain, for it gave him the tools to prepare the gods for the battles to come. When he fought, Odin's presence was overwhelming. He stood at the forefront, his wolves, Jerry and Freki, snarling by his side, their eyes glinting with a savage hunger. His cloak billowed like a storm cloud, and the tip of Gungnir glowed with an almost unearthly light. He was a terrifying sight, a god who fought not with brute strength alone, but with a mind sharpened by centuries of knowledge, pain, and sacrifice. Odin's wars were never simple. They were tangled knots of strategy and sacrifice, of hope and despair. His victories came at great cost, and his losses were more devastating than anyone could imagine. Yet, he continued, driven by the knowledge that even gods must fight for their place in the world. He taught the gods that war was not just about power, it was about endurance, about standing firm even when fate had already written your defeat. When the gods looked to him, they saw a leader who bore the weight of the universe on his shoulders. They saw a god who had given everything, his eye, his pain, his very soul, to prepare for what was to come. Odin led not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He was the All-Father, the one who bore the burden of seeing the end and still fighting against it. And as the battles raged on, as the gods clashed with enemies that threatened to destroy everything, Odin remained unyielding. His wisdom guided their hands, his sacrifices inspired their hearts, and his unrelenting will kept them standing, even in the face of certain doom. He was the god of war, not because he loved it, but because he understood it. War was his art, his curse, and his legacy, etched into the hearts of gods and mortals alike. The sky split open with the sound of battle cries, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the roots of existence itself. Spears clashed with shields, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of burning fields and the cries of the wounded. This was no ordinary war, it was the gods themselves, the mighty Aesir and Vanir, locked in a conflict that would reshape the fabric of their world. The very thought of gods, beings of unmatched power, clashing in such rage sent shivers through those who later spoke of it. It was said their fury could have torn the cosmos apart if left unchecked. It began with a wound, an act of betrayal that bled into mistrust and pride. The Aesir, with their thunderous strength and unyielding will, ruled from their stronghold in Asgard. Odin, their All-Father, led them with his piercing gaze and unmatched wisdom. Yet, there were others, the Vanir, gods of fertility, prosperity, and nature, whose power was more subtle but no less formidable. They ruled with a quiet resilience, their home in Vanaheim a place of lush beauty and untamed magic. For years, these two tribes of gods coexisted, their realms separated by understanding and distance. Until that day. The spark came in the form of Gulveig, a Vanir goddess of beauty and gold, who walked among the Aesir. She was mesmerizing, a creature who seemed to glisten with an otherworldly radiance, but her love for gold and her whispers of its power unsettled the Aesir. They saw her as a threat, a corrupting influence that could poison their strength. The Aesir bound her, tortured her, and cast her into fire, not once but thrice. Each time, she rose again, untouched by their wrath, her gaze filled with silent defiance. When word of this reached the Vanir, their fury was immeasurable. To harm one of their own was an unforgivable insult. They demanded restitution, but the Aesir, proud and unyielding, refused. And so, the gods turned to war. The first clash was unlike anything ever seen. The Aesir, clad in their shining armor, charged forward with thunder in their hearts. Thor, the god of storms, swung Mjolnir, his mighty hammer, and the earth trembled beneath its force. Lightning struck in blinding arcs, carving through the Vanir ranks. Yet the Vanir were not defenseless. Njord, god of the seas, called upon the oceans, and waves rose like mountains, crashing into Asgard's defenses. Freyr, the god of fertility and sunlight, turned the land itself against the Aesir, vines and roots coiling around their feet, dragging them into the earth. For years, the battles raged. The skies darkened with smoke and ash as the gods fought with every ounce of their divine power. Mountains crumbled, rivers boiled, and entire fields vanished under the weight of their fury. Yet, for all their might, neither side could claim victory. The Aesir's strength was matched by the Vanir's cunning, their strategies balancing out the chaos of Thor's storms and Odin's unrelenting will. Amid the bloodshed, something began to change. Both sides, weary from the unending conflict, began to see the cost of their pride. The land bore scars that even gods could not erase. Crops withered, and the mortals who worshipped them began to turn away, their prayers fading like whispers lost in the wind. It was Freya, the Vanir goddess of love and beauty, who first spoke of peace. Her voice carried a warmth that seemed to cut through the bitterness, and even Odin could not ignore her wisdom. The gods met in silence, their weapons sheathed, but their tempers still simmering. It was not an easy gathering, the wounds of the war ran too deep for simple words to heal. But as they sat together, something extraordinary happened. They began to listen, not to the accusations or the threats, but to the pain behind them. Each side bore the weight of loss, and in that shared grief, they found the beginnings of understanding. To seal their truce, the gods performed a sacred ritual. They each spat into a great cauldron, mixing their essence as a symbol of unity. From this, they created Kvasir, a being of unmatched wisdom, born of both Aesir and Vanir. He became a living testament to what they could achieve together, a reminder of the peace forged through their suffering. The war ended, but its echoes lingered. The Vanir, once enemies, became part of Asgard, their gods walking among the Aesir as equals. Njord, Freyr, and Freya took their places in the halls of Asgard, their presence a symbol of the bond that had been forged. Yet, neither side could forget the battles that had scarred their lands and their hearts. They carried the memories of fire and fury, of pride and reconciliation, into the ages that followed. This was not a tale of victory or defeat. It was a story of gods who learned that even they were not above the bonds of respect and unity. The Aesir-Vanir War was more than a clash of powers, it was a crucible that tested their souls and reshaped their world forever. The wind howled through the frozen peaks of Jotunheim, a sound so fierce it felt alive, like a beast prowling the endless snowfields. Here, in the land of the giants, the earth seemed to groan under the weight of an ancient grudge. The gods of Asgard stood at the border, their breath turning to mist as they prepared for the clash that always seemed inevitable. Thor's hand tightened around the handle of Mjolnir, his storm-forged hammer humming with barely contained power. Beside him, Loki's eyes gleamed with a mixture of cunning and dread, emotions only he could weave so seamlessly together. The giants, tall as mountains and fierce as winter's wrath, gathered on the other side, their roars echoing like avalanches in the distance. They were not mere monsters, they were beings of immense power, born of chaos and older than many of the gods themselves. Their hatred for the Aesir burned bright, born from ancient wrongs and unyielding pride. But today, it wasn't about hatred alone. Today, it was about survival. The battle between gods and giants was never-ending, each clash a reminder of a world caught between creation and destruction. The gods fought to maintain order, to preserve the delicate balance of their existence, while the giants sought to shatter it, to drag everything into the churning chaos from which they came. This was not a simple feud. It was a war of purpose, a conflict as old as the first breath of life. In one of the fiercest battles, Thor found himself face-to-face with Hrungnir, the strongest of all giants. Hrungnir's massive stone club could crush mountains, and his heart was made of hard rock, as cold as the glaciers surrounding them. Thor's eyes narrowed as lightning cracked across the dark sky, illuminating the towering form of his opponent. The clash between them was like the meeting of a thunderstorm and an earthquake. Mjolnir struck with such force that the ground beneath them split, jagged cracks racing outward like veins of fury. Hrungnir roared, swinging his club with terrifying speed, but Thor's determination was unshakable. With one final, deafening blow, Thor shattered Hrungnir's stone heart, the giant falling with a thunderous crash that shook the mountains. Yet, for every victory the gods claimed, the giants answered with their own brutal defiance. Skrymir, a giant of cunning and immense size, once stood against Thor and his companions. He toyed with them, showing a strength that seemed effortless. Thor struck him thrice with all his might, but each blow barely seemed to graze the giant. It was only later that Thor realized the truth. Skrymir had used his magic to deflect the blows, laughing at the god's frustration. It was a humbling moment, one that showed the giants were not only strong but also clever, capable of turning the gods' arrogance against them. Loki, though born of Jotunheim, often stood with the Aesir, his sharp tongue and sharper mind aiding in battles against his kin. Yet his loyalties were like shifting sands, and his role in these conflicts was as complex as the man himself. In one confrontation, Loki tricked the giant Thrym, who had stolen Thor's hammer, into returning it. Disguising Thor as Freya, the goddess of beauty, Loki orchestrated a wedding where the hammer was presented as a gift. Thor, still dressed in bridal garb, seized Mjolnir and unleashed his wrath, scattering the giants like leaves in a storm. It was a strange and almost humorous tale, but beneath it lay the unrelenting tension between the gods and giants, a conflict that never truly ended, only paused. Jotunheim itself seemed to rise against Asgard. Its mountains loomed like silent sentinels, and its rivers carried the chill of ancient hostility. Every step into that land was a challenge, every breath a reminder that this was a place untouched by the order of the gods. Yet the giants were not always the aggressors. There were tales of their wisdom, of their attempts to coexist. Mimir, the wise one whose severed head still whispered secrets to Odin, was of giant descent. His knowledge was unmatched, his insights shaping the very fabric of Asgard's destiny. But even such moments of connection could not erase the bitterness that lingered between the two sides. The battles were not just physical, they were battles of will, of cunning, of fate itself. The gods, for all their strength, knew they were bound by destiny, and the giants were no different. Each clash carried the weight of prophecy, the whispers of Ragnarok, the end of all things, hovering like a storm cloud on the horizon. It was said that when that final day came, the giants would rise one last time, their fury unbridled, and the gods would fall in a blaze of fire and fury. For now, though, the war continued, each side testing the other, pushing the boundaries of power and endurance. It was not a war of conquest, but of survival, a fight to define the shape of existence itself. And as the gods returned to Asgard, their shields dented and their spirits bruised, they knew it was only a matter of time before they would face Jotunheim's defiance once more. The battlefield was alive with chaos, a place where swords sang and shields shattered. Warriors clashed under a blood-red sky, their cries mingling with the deafening roar of combat. Yet amidst the turmoil, a strange calm descended, a presence that only the dying could sense. Eyes that flickered with life's last glimmer turned upward, and there they were, the Valkyries. They emerged like ghosts from the heavens, riding winged steeds or gliding effortlessly through the smoke and ash. Their armor gleamed with an ethereal glow, catching the faint light of a sun that struggled to pierce the battle's storm. Each Valkyrie was a paradox of beauty and dread, their expressions both tender and unyielding. They were not there to comfort. They were there to choose. To the living, they were a whisper on the edge of perception, a shadow at the corner of the eye. But to those whose lives slipped through their fingers like grains of sand, the Valkyries were unmistakable. Their presence carried weight, as if the air itself bowed to their will. And with each soul they selected, they altered the course of history. There was a warrior, a young man who fought with the desperation of one who knew his time had come. Blood streaked his face, his sword arm heavy, yet his spirit burned bright. He had fought bravely, not for glory, but for the people he had sworn to protect. As his knees buckled and his vision blurred, he felt the brush of a feather against his cheek. His head tilted back, and there she was. A Valkyrie stood over him, her gaze piercing, her hand extended. Without words, she told him he had been chosen, and in that moment, his pain gave way to peace. The Valkyries did not simply collect the fallen. They determined who was worthy to ascend to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where the honored dead would feast and prepare for the final battle at Ragnarok. But worthiness was not measured by victory alone. It was the courage to face impossible odds, the selflessness to fight for others, the strength to endure even when hope seemed lost. The Valkyries saw all of this in an instant, their judgment swift and absolute. Yet their role was not limited to the dead. The Valkyries were also silent arbiters of battle, their presence tipping the scales in unseen ways. They whispered to the hearts of warriors, kindling flames of resolve or sowing seeds of doubt. An arrow that found its mark, a shield that failed at a critical moment, these were not always accidents. The Valkyries guided fate, their unseen hands weaving the tapestry of war. In one legendary battle, a great chieftain faced overwhelming odds. His enemies surrounded him, their forces vast and unrelenting. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, his every strike a defiance of death. As his strength waned, he caught a glimpse of a Valkyrie watching from the edge of the fray. Her eyes locked with his, and he felt a surge of power, as if her gaze alone had poured fire into his veins. He roared and charged, cutting through his foes with a fury that seemed otherworldly. Though he fell in the end, his sacrifice turned the tide, and his people lived to see another day. But not all encounters with the Valkyries ended in glory. Some warriors begged for their favor, their hearts trembling with ambition, only to be met with cold indifference. The Valkyries did not reward pride or greed. They did not care for titles or wealth. They served a purpose higher than mortal understanding, their allegiance to Odin and the eternal balance of the cosmos. The Valkyries were not immune to emotion, though they rarely showed it. There were stories of those who wept for the brave, their tears falling like silver rain upon the battlefield. Others were said to have loved the mortals they chose, their hearts breaking as they guided them to Valhalla. Yet they never faltered in their duty. To be a Valkyrie was to carry the weight of lives and destinies, a burden as heavy as the skies themselves. In the quiet moments after a battle, when the earth lay scarred and the air was thick with the smell of blood, the Valkyries lingered. They moved among the dead like spirits, their hands brushing against lifeless faces, their whispers lost to the wind. They were not cruel, though their work seemed harsh. They were guardians of something greater, something that even the gods revered. And as they departed, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath, as if mourning their absence. The warriors they had chosen rode with them to Valhalla, their spirits glowing with the honor of the afterlife. Those left behind felt a void, a silence where once there had been the promise of something divine. The Valkyries were not just choosers of the slain, they were the soul of the battlefield, the unseen force that gave meaning to war's chaos. And in their silent, unyielding grace, they reminded mortals of the fragile line between life and eternity. The cold wind cut through the battlefield like a knife, carrying with it the cries of warriors locked in mortal combat. The clash of iron on iron echoed across the frozen expanse, a symphony of violence and survival. At the heart of it all stood a towering figure, his axe gleaming under the pale sunlight, his breath fogging in the frigid air. He fought not for conquest, but for something far greater, honor. In Norse mythology, warfare was not merely a clash of arms, it was a sacred act, a test of courage and character. Every strike of the blade, every block of the shield, carried the weight of one's fate. Warriors entered battle with the knowledge that their deeds would echo through eternity, sung by skalds in mead halls and immortalized in the sagas of their people. Weapons in Norse mythology were more than tools of war. They were extensions of the warrior's soul, crafted with care and imbued with power. Swords like Gram, wielded by Sigurd to slay the dragon Fafnir, were symbols of destiny and justice. Axes, such as those carried by the berserkers, represented raw strength and unyielding will. Even simple spears, like Odin's Gungnir, were revered as instruments of divine purpose, forged by the master craftsmen, the dwarves, and blessed to always strike true. But tools alone did not make a warrior. Strategy was as vital as skill. Norse battles were often defined by clever tactics, honed through countless skirmishes and raids. Shield walls were the backbone of their formations, a testament to unity and discipline. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields locked tight, creating an impenetrable barrier. Behind this wall of strength, they would advance as one, forcing their enemies to either break against them or retreat in fear. In these battles, the role of the leader was paramount. A chieftain or jarl was not merely a commander but a source of inspiration. His presence on the field could ignite the hearts of his warriors, urging them to fight harder, to endure longer. Leaders like Sigurd, Ragnar Lothbrok, and Beowulf were renowned not just for their skill in combat, but for their ability to turn the tide with a single rallying cry or daring maneuver. There were also the berserkers, fearless, almost otherworldly warriors who fought in a trance-like fury. Their name, meaning bear shirt, came from their practice of wearing animal pelts, channeling the spirit of beasts to fuel their ferocity. They charged into battle with no thought for their own safety, their eyes blazing with wild determination. To face a berserker was to confront a force of nature, unstoppable and unrelenting. Amid the chaos of war, honor guided every decision. To fight without fear, to protect one's kin, to show mercy when it was deserved, these were the marks of a true warrior. Even in moments of betrayal or despair, the Norse believed in facing death with dignity. A warrior who fell with courage would ascend to Valhalla, where he would feast with the gods and prepare for Ragnarok, the final battle. The principles of Norse warfare were woven into their lives like threads in a tapestry. Children were taught from an early age to wield a weapon, not out of a love for violence but out of a need to defend what was theirs. Women, too, played their part, often fighting alongside men or leading their people in times of need. Figures like Lagertha, the legendary shield maiden, stood as symbols of bravery and resilience, proving that the call to arms was not limited by gender. Even in the heat of battle, there was a kind of artistry to their movements. A sword strike was not just a swing of the arm but a carefully calculated act, aimed with precision and intent. A shield raised in defense was a statement of survival, a refusal to fall. Every clash of blades, every roar of defiance, painted a picture of humanity's unyielding spirit. In the end, war in Norse mythology was more than a means to an end. It was a reflection of life itself, brutal and unforgiving yet filled with moments of breathtaking courage and beauty. Through the fog of blood and steel, the warriors of old stood as a testament to the power of honor and the indomitable strength of the human soul. In the vast void where nothing yet existed, there was silence, cold, endless, and unbroken. But within that emptiness, something stirred, something ancient and powerful. From the meeting of fire and ice in the chasm of Ginnungagap, the first being was born, Ymir, the primordial giant. His breath filled the void, heavy and consuming, while his colossal form stretched endlessly, embodying chaos itself. His very existence was both a marvel and a threat. The gods emerged in this formless world, young and full of purpose. Among them were Odin and his brothers, Vili and Ve. They looked upon Ymir with both awe and dread. He was no ordinary creature, his very presence brought forth more life, wild and uncontrollable. From the sweat of his body sprang more giants, multiplying rapidly and filling the void with their untamed might. The brothers knew that this unchecked chaos could not be allowed to reign. Their decision was not made lightly. Ymir was not only a being of immense power, but also the foundation of all that had come to be. To challenge him was to challenge creation itself. Yet Odin, with his unshakable resolve, stood firm. "We will forge a world of order from this chaos," he declared, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. His brothers nodded, their faces set with determination. When the time came, the gods struck with ferocity. Ymir awoke to the thunderous sound of their assault, his great form rising like a mountain against the sky. The battle that followed was unlike anything that had ever been seen, or ever would be again. Ymir's roars echoed across the void, shaking the very fabric of existence. Each swing of his massive limbs sent shockwaves rippling through the emptiness, threatening to crush everything in their path. But Odin and his brothers were relentless. With every strike, they chipped away at the giant's vast body. Blood flowed like rivers from Ymir's wounds, staining the void with its deep, rich red. The struggle was monumental, a clash of divine will against primordial force. The brothers fought not just with weapons, but with cunning and unity, their combined strength forming an unbreakable bond. At last, Ymir fell. His body crashed into the abyss with a sound so deafening it seemed to split the void itself. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of what had been done. Ymir's lifeblood poured forth, filling the emptiness and drowning many of the giants who had sprung from him. Only a few, such as Bergelmir and his wife, managed to escape, carrying with them the seeds of the future Jotunheim. But the death of Ymir was not the end. From his vast corpse, the gods began their greatest work. His flesh became the earth, solid and firm beneath their feet. His blood became the seas, vast and endless, surging with life. His bones were shaped into mountains, jagged and proud, reaching toward the heavens. His teeth and shattered bones formed rocks and cliffs, while his hair spread across the land as lush forests. The gods took his skull and lifted it high, creating the sky. They placed it as a dome above the new world, held aloft by four dwarves, Nori, Suri, Austri, and Vestri, who stood at its corners. From Ymir's brains, they formed the clouds, wispy and light, drifting across the heavens. His eyebrows became the boundaries of Midgard, the realm of humanity, protecting it from the chaos that lay beyond. Even the stars and celestial bodies were born from this act of creation. The gods flung sparks from the fiery realm of Muspelheim into the sky, where they burned brightly, illuminating the new world with their eternal glow. Each element of the cosmos was carefully crafted, a testament to the gods' vision and the sacrifice of Ymir. Yet, this act was not without its cost. The weight of their actions hung heavy on Odin and his brothers. They had slain the being from which all life had sprung, a creature both terrifying and magnificent. They had taken chaos and forged it into order, but in doing so, they had set a precedent. Creation and destruction were forever intertwined. The new world, born from Ymir's demise, was vast and filled with potential. 9 realms emerged, each unique and connected by the great tree Yggdrasil. Asgard, the realm of the gods, stood high above, a beacon of order and power. Midgard lay at its center, the home of humanity, protected and nurtured by the gods. Jotunheim, the land of the giants, remained a wild and untamed place, a reminder of the chaotic forces that had birthed the world. The battle with Ymir was more than a fight, it was a defining moment. It marked the beginning of everything, a turning point that shaped the destiny of gods and mortals alike. From the blood and bones of a giant came the beauty and order of creation, a world both fragile and enduring. And at its heart stood the gods, forever bound by the choices they had made and the legacy they had forged. The skies churned with restless winds, and the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. The gods stood in tense silence, their eyes fixed on the looming figure before them. The first giant, a being of unimaginable size and ferocity, towered over them like a living mountain. His name was lost to time, but his presence was an undeniable reminder of the raw, unbridled force of the ancient world. This was no ordinary foe. The giant's skin shimmered with the icy hues of the primordial void, and his breath carried the chill of 1,000 frozen nights. His eyes burned like molten fire, a stark contrast to the frost that clung to his massive frame. He embodied chaos, a force that threatened to overwhelm the young gods before they could even establish their place in the cosmos. Odin, still untested as a leader, gripped his spear Gungnir tightly. His brothers, Vili and Ve, flanked him, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. This was not just a battle, it was a reckoning. The gods had chosen to stand against the forces of chaos, and this first confrontation would determine their fate. The giant moved, and the ground trembled beneath his weight. Each step sent ripples through the earth, shaking the gods to their core. He raised a hand, fingers like jagged cliffs, and his voice boomed, a guttural roar that seemed to tear through the fabric of existence. "You dare challenge me," he bellowed, his words dripping with disdain. "You, who are but children, dare to defy the ancient order." Odin's heart thundered in his chest, but he refused to show fear. He stepped forward, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "We dare because we must. This world cannot thrive under the shadow of chaos." The battle erupted with a ferocity that defied comprehension. The giant swung his massive arm, and the gods scattered like leaves in a gale. The impact of his strike shattered the ground, sending shards of rock flying in all directions. Yet the gods were quick, their movements guided by a combination of skill and sheer willpower. They struck back, their weapons flashing as they sought to find a weakness in their colossal foe. Vili charged forward, his sword glinting with a light that seemed to cut through the gloom. He struck at the giant's legs, his blade biting into the frozen flesh. The giant howled in pain, his roar echoing across the vast emptiness. Ve followed, hurling his axe with unerring precision. The weapon struck true, embedding itself in the giant's shoulder. Blood as cold as ice and as thick as tar flowed from the wound, staining the earth beneath. But the giant was far from defeated. With a sweep of his massive arm, he sent Ve tumbling across the battlefield. Vili barely avoided a similar fate, dodging the attack with a desperate roll. Odin watched, his mind racing. This was more than a test of strength, it was a battle of wits, of strategy. The giant's size was both his greatest weapon and his greatest weakness. Odin raised Gungnir, the spear crafted with divine precision, and called out to his brothers. "Strike together. Bring him down with one coordinated blow." Vili and Ve nodded, their resolve unshaken despite their injuries. They regrouped, their movements synchronizing with Odin's. The giant roared, sensing their intent, and lashed out with renewed fury. But the gods were faster, their unity giving them an edge that even the colossal giant could not match. As the giant prepared to strike again, Odin surged forward, his spear aimed at the creature's chest. Vili and Ve attacked simultaneously, their weapons cutting into the giant's legs and arms. The giant faltered, his balance disrupted. Odin saw his chance and drove Gungnir deep into the giant's heart. The spear pierced through, its divine energy radiating with a brilliance that lit up the battlefield. The giant let out one final, earth-shaking roar before collapsing. His massive body hit the ground with a force that sent shockwaves rippling through the earth. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of their victory settling heavily on the gods. As they stood over the fallen giant, the gods felt a mixture of triumph and sorrow. They had won, but at what cost? This battle was more than a fight, it was a turning point. The death of the first giant marked the beginning of a new era, one where the gods would take their place as the architects of order in a chaotic world. Odin looked at his brothers, their faces streaked with blood and sweat. He saw the weariness in their eyes, but also the determination. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "There will be more battles to come, more sacrifices to make. But today, we have proven that we are capable. We will shape this world, no matter the cost." The gods turned their attention to the fallen giant. His body, immense and unyielding, would not go to waste. From his remains, they began to craft the foundations of their new world. His bones became mountains, his blood the rivers and seas. His flesh gave life to the earth, and his breath became the winds that would carry life across the land. In slaying the first giant, the gods had done more than defeat an enemy, they had set the stage for creation itself. But the memory of that battle would stay with them forever, a reminder of the cost of their ambition and the fragile balance between order and chaos. The first giant was gone, but his impact would echo through the ages, shaping the destiny of gods and mortals alike. The sky split open with a roar that shook the heavens. Lightning streaked across the dark expanse, each bolt brighter than the last. The air was electric, pulsing with an energy so fierce it felt alive. At the center of it all stood Thor, his muscles taut, his face a mask of grim determination. In his hand, Mjolnir, the hammer forged in the heart of a dying star, seemed to hum with anticipation. Across the churning sea, his nemesis stirred. Jormungandr, the world serpent, emerged from the depths with a hiss that curdled the blood. Its massive coils broke through the waves, darkening the horizon. The creature's eyes glowed like twin orbs of venom, unblinking and cold. Its maw, filled with jagged teeth, opened wide enough to swallow mountains whole. Thor knew this was no ordinary foe. This was a beast born of chaos, destined to be his eternal rival. The first time Thor encountered the serpent, he was young, brash, and eager to prove himself. He had heard tales of the great creature, how it encircled Midgard, its body so vast it could bite its own tail. The gods whispered of its poisonous breath, its unyielding strength. But Thor did not fear it. He relished the challenge, his heart burning with the need to assert his place among the Aesir. Thor's first clash with Jormungandr was unplanned, a chance meeting that became legend. He had gone to the sea, searching for answers in the storms. The waves crashed around him as if warning him to turn back, but Thor pressed on, his hammer ready. Then, without warning, the serpent rose from the depths, its massive head blocking out the sun. Thor's breath caught, but only for a moment. He gripped Mjolnir tighter, his knuckles white, and let out a battle cry that echoed across the water. The serpent struck first, its body moving with a speed that defied its size. Thor barely dodged the attack, the spray of water blinding him. He retaliated with a swing of Mjolnir, the hammer colliding with the serpent's scaled hide. The impact sent shockwaves through the sea, the sound of it like thunder cracking the sky. For a moment, the serpent recoiled, its hiss of pain reverberating through the air. But it was far from defeated. The battle raged on, each clash of hammer and falm creating ripples that reached the shores of Midgard. Thor struck again and again, his blows fueled by both rage and purpose. Each time Mjolnir met the serpent's flesh, the heavens responded with a roar of thunder, as if acknowledging the birth of something extraordinary. This was no mere fight, it was the forging of a legacy. With every strike, Thor was carving his place as the god of thunder. But Jormungandr was no easy foe. Its venomous breath filled the air, choking the life out of everything around it. Thor's lungs burned, his vision blurred, but he refused to falter. He met the serpent's gaze, unyielding, and launched himself into the fray once more. The serpent lashed out, its tail whipping through the water with enough force to split the waves. Thor took the hit head-on, the impact sending him hurtling through the air. He landed hard, the wind knocked out of him, but even as the pain seared through his body, he rose. The serpent loomed over him, its massive form casting a shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly. Thor lifted Mjolnir high, summoning the storm to his aid. Lightning danced around him, illuminating the battle in a blinding light. The hammer came down with a force that shook the earth, striking the serpent's head and sending it reeling. For a moment, it seemed the creature might fall, but it slithered back into the depths, its retreat a promise of future vengeance. Thor stood on the edge of the battered shore, his chest heaving. The storm quieted, the thunder fading into the distance. The battle was over, but it was only the beginning. Thor had proven himself that day, not just to the gods, but to the storms themselves. The lightning that once danced aimlessly across the skies now answered to him. The thunder that once roared without purpose now carried his name. Yet Thor knew this victory was temporary. Jormungandr would return, and their battles would shape the fate of the realms. Each clash would bring with it new storms, new thunder, and new tales of courage. Thor accepted this fate, not with dread but with a fierce resolve. He was the thunder god, and his destiny was bound to the serpent. Every bolt of lightning, every clap of thunder, was a reminder of their eternal struggle, a struggle that would define him for all time. Thor walked away from the battlefield, the weight of his hammer in his hand a comforting presence. The skies above him rumbled softly, as if offering their approval. And though the serpent's shadow still lingered, Thor felt no fear. He had faced chaos and lived. He had stood against the abyss and claimed his place among the gods. Thunder rolled in the distance, not as a warning, but as a song, a tribute to the god who had turned the storm into his weapon. The halls of Asgard glimmered with an otherworldly light, golden beams catching on polished walls and rich tapestries. Yet, beneath the surface of this divine splendor, a shadow lingered. It moved silently, weaving through the gods' laughter and the hum of their revelry. That shadow was Loki, the trickster, a figure both captivating and feared. His smile, sly and knowing, hinted at the chaos bubbling beneath his charming exterior. This was no ordinary night. The air seemed charged, the faintest whisper of mischief curling at its edges. Sif stood in the garden, her golden hair flowing like liquid sunlight. Her laughter, soft and melodic, carried on the breeze. Her hair was not merely beautiful, it was a symbol of vitality, a mark of favor from the gods. It was said that her locks captured the light of the sun itself, blessing Asgard with their glow. To Thor, Sif's hair was sacred, a treasure he cherished as much as his mighty hammer. Loki watched her from the shadows, his mind a storm of schemes. He saw in her hair not beauty, but opportunity. His mischievous heart, restless as always, sought a new game, a new way to upend the order the gods held so dear. There was no malice in his grin, only the thrill of what might come when his prank unraveled the threads of their peace. When the dawn broke, Asgard woke to Sif's scream. Her golden hair, once radiant and flowing, was gone. Every strand had vanished, leaving her head bare. She stood in the courtyard, tears streaking her face, her hands clutching at the emptiness where her hair had been. Thor stormed to her side, his fury palpable. The air around him seemed to vibrate with his rage, thunderclouds gathering in the once clear sky. "Who dares to do this?" Thor's voice was a roar that shook the walls of Asgard. His eyes burned with a fire that promised vengeance. From the shadows, Loki stepped forward, a smirk tugging at his lips. "It was I," he said, his tone light, as though confessing to a harmless jest. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, crackled with energy as he raised it. "You dare harm Sif in such a way? You think this is a joke?" Loki held up his hands, his smile never faltering. "Calm yourself, brother. What is hair but a passing adornment? I will make amends, greater than you can imagine." But Thor's fury was not so easily soothed. He lunged at Loki, the ground quaking beneath his feet. Loki, ever the nimble one, darted away, his laughter ringing out. "Give me a chance," he cried. "I will fix it. I swear by my cunning." Reluctantly, Thor lowered his hammer, though his anger did not wane. He gave Loki one chance to restore what he had taken. Loki wasted no time. He traveled to the dwarves, the master craftsmen of the realms. He approached the sons of Ivaldi, renowned for their skill, and demanded they forge a new crown of hair for Sif, one that would surpass the beauty of her original locks. The dwarves agreed, their hammers striking against molten metal with a rhythm that echoed like a heartbeat. When the new hair was forged, it shimmered like gold spun from sunlight. Loki returned to Asgard, presenting the creation to Thor and Sif. The moment the new hair touched her head, it took root, flowing down her back in waves of brilliance. Gasps filled the air as the gods beheld the craftsmanship of the dwarves. But Loki, ever the trickster, was not satisfied with mere restitution. The act of mischief had stirred something deeper, a need to unsettle the gods further. In securing Sif's hair, Loki had also procured two other gifts, the mighty spear Gungnir for Odin and the ship Skidbladnir for Freyr. Each was a marvel, creations of unmatched genius. Yet Loki, never one to avoid pushing boundaries, set another plan in motion. He approached Brokkr and Sindri, two rival dwarves, and challenged them to create gifts even greater. The challenge was bait, and the dwarves, prideful as they were, took it. They forged Gullinbursti, the golden boar, and Draupnir, the ring of endless wealth. But their crowning achievement was Mjolnir, the hammer destined to become Thor's greatest weapon. When Loki returned to Asgard with these treasures, he presented them with a flourish. The gods marveled at the gifts, each one more incredible than the last. Yet the tension lingered. Loki's betrayal had left a scar, a wound that no gift could truly heal. Thor's gaze remained heavy, his trust in Loki shaken to its core. Though Sif's hair had been restored, and the gods had gained treasures of unparalleled power, the battle between Loki and Thor was far from over. Loki's act had set in motion a chain of events, a ripple that would grow into a storm. The gods had been reminded of Loki's true nature, that of a trickster who thrived in chaos, who found joy in turning harmony into discord. As the sun set over Asgard, casting long shadows across its golden halls, Thor stood alone, Mjolnir in hand. His heart burned with the knowledge that Loki's games were far from finished. Each clash, each betrayal, would forge him anew, shaping the god he was destined to become. And in the distance, Loki watched, his smile faint, his eyes gleaming with the promise of more mischief to come. The skies above Alfheim were painted in shades of silver and lavender, an ethereal beauty that seemed eternal. But beneath the serene facade, a storm of shadows loomed. Freyr, the god of fertility and light, stood on the edge of the elven lands, his golden sword in hand. His face, often kind and filled with warmth, was now carved with determination. He gazed out at the horizon, where the encroaching darkness writhed like a living beast. The enemy came in waves, creatures born of shadow and malice, their forms shifting and grotesque. These were not mere foes, they were forces of despair, seeking to snuff out the radiance of Alfheim and drag it into eternal night. For the elves, who thrived on the harmony of their lands, this was more than a battle. It was a fight for their very existence. Freyr had always been a symbol of life's gentle cycles, the blooming of flowers, the nurturing rains, the sun's embrace. But now, he stood as a warrior, his radiant aura the only beacon in the growing darkness. He turned to his elven allies, their faces pale but resolute. Their bows were drawn, their swords gleaming in the dim light. "Stand firm," Freyr called out, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing around them. "For every inch of this land, for every blade of grass, we fight." The first clash was a cacophony of sound, metal against metal, the guttural growls of the shadow creatures, and the cries of the wounded. Freyr charged forward, his sword a streak of light cutting through the gloom. Each swing sent pulses of golden energy through the battlefield, dissolving shadows into wisps of smoke. Yet, the darkness did not falter. It pressed harder, sending forth monstrous forms that towered over the elves. Freyr found himself face to face with a beast unlike any he had seen, a hulking mass of sinew and shadow, its eyes burning like coals. The creature lunged, its claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. Freyr parried, the clash reverberating through his arms. He stumbled but did not fall. The beast roared, its voice a chilling echo that seemed to sap the courage of those who heard it. But Freyr, drawing on the light within him, stood his ground. With a cry that rang out like the first ray of dawn piercing the night, he struck the beast down, his blade cutting through its form with a brilliance that lit the battlefield. Victory in that moment was fleeting. For every beast that fell, two more seemed to rise. The elves fought valiantly, their arrows flying true, but they were weary. Freyr could feel it, the weight of the battle pressing down on them all. He raised his sword to the sky, calling upon the light of the heavens. A burst of energy cascaded over the battlefield, momentarily halting the advance of the shadows. In the brief lull, Freyr turned to his closest ally, an elven warrior named Irian. Her silver hair was matted with blood, but her eyes burned with an unyielding fire. "We cannot hold much longer," she said, her voice strained but steady. Freyr nodded, his gaze sweeping over the battlefield. The light was fading, and the darkness seemed endless. But surrender was not an option. He reached deep within himself, summoning a strength he had never tapped before. The ground beneath his feet began to glow, and from it sprouted vines of golden light. They snaked across the battlefield, ensnaring the shadow creatures and holding them in place. The elves, seeing this surge of power, found renewed courage. They fought with everything they had, their blades slicing through the darkness, their arrows finding their marks. Freyr led them, his sword cutting a path through the heart of the enemy forces. But the battle was far from over. From the depths of the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence suffocating. It was the master of the shadow creatures, a being of ancient evil whose name was whispered only in fear. Freyr stepped forward, his sword gleaming brighter than ever. The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound that chilled the air. "You cannot win, God of Light," it said, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "This land will fall, and you with it." Freyr did not respond with words. Instead, he raised his sword high, its light piercing through the gloom. The figure recoiled, its form wavering. Freyr charged, his movements swift and precise. The two clashed, light against shadow, their battle shaking the very ground. Every strike from Freyr's sword sent ripples of light through the battlefield, momentarily pushing back the darkness. But the figure was relentless, its attacks calculated and merciless. Freyr felt the strain, his energy waning, but he refused to falter. As their battle raged, the elves rallied around him. They fought with a unity born of desperation and hope, their spirits lifted by the sight of Freyr standing unbroken. Irian, her blade shining with the light of Freyr's vines, led the charge against the shadow creatures, her voice ringing out above the chaos. In a final, desperate move, Freyr summoned every ounce of his power. His sword blazed like the sun, and with a mighty swing, he struck the figure down. The light consumed it, banishing the shadows and leaving the battlefield silent. The darkness receded, and the first rays of dawn broke over Alfheim. The elves stood battered but victorious, their faces turned to the rising sun. Freyr, though weary, stood tall, his sword planted in the ground. He looked out over the lands he had fought so hard to protect, his heart heavy with the cost of their victory. The elven lands, though scarred, would heal. But Freyr knew this was only the beginning. The forces of darkness would not rest, and neither could he. For Alfheim, for the light, he would always stand ready to fight. The chill of winter hung heavy in the air, a biting cold that seemed to seep into the bones of even the gods themselves. Skadi stood alone atop the snow-covered peak, her silhouette sharp against the silver glow of the moon. She was a vision of ice and fire, a goddess whose beauty masked the storm of rage swirling within her. Her eyes, like shards of frost, scanned the distant horizon where the Vanir gods dwelled. Her father, Thjatsi, was gone. Slain by the Aesir and Vanir alike, his death had been a cruel act of betrayal cloaked in righteousness. Skadi's heart, once tempered by the serene mountains she called home, now burned with a single purpose, vengeance. The echoes of her father's laughter, now silenced forever, fueled her resolve. She would make them pay. As the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, Skadi descended. Her movements were deliberate, each step crunching the snow beneath her feet. In her hand, she carried a bow carved from ancient yew, its string taut with the promise of retribution. Across her back lay a quiver of arrows tipped with jagged shards of ice, each one capable of piercing even the gods' immortal flesh. The Vanir sensed her coming long before she reached their gates. The winds carried whispers of her fury, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of her intent. Freyr, standing on the battlements of the Vanir stronghold, felt a shiver run through him. "She comes," he said softly, his voice tinged with unease. The Vanir gathered their forces, preparing for a confrontation they could not avoid. Freyr, his sister Freya, and Jord, the sea god, stood at the forefront. Their expressions were grim, for they knew Skadi's wrath would not be easily quelled. Skadi arrived, her presence commanding and unyielding. She raised her bow, an arrow already notched, and aimed it directly at Jord. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the icy air like a blade. You dared to take part in my father's death. Speak now, or forever hold your silence in hell's embrace. Njord stepped forward, his face calm but his eyes wary. Thjazi brought his fate upon himself, he said. His deeds threatened the balance of the realms. Skadi's laugh was sharp and hollow. Balance, she spat. You speak of balance while standing on the ashes of my family? Your words are as hollow as your honor. Without another word, she released the arrow. It streaked through the air, its path true, aimed at Njord's heart. Freyr moved swiftly, raising his sword to deflect it, but the force of the impact sent him staggering. The arrow shattered, ice splintering across the ground, but Skadi had already loosed another. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Skadi's arrows rained down like a hailstorm, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. The Vanir fought back, their power clashing with hers in a cacophony of sound and fury. Freyr's sword shone like the sun, its light a beacon against the storm of ice and snow. Freya, wielding her magic, summoned waves of golden energy to shield her kin. But Skadi was relentless. She moved with the grace of a predator, her arrows striking faster than the eye could follow. The ground beneath her froze solid, a reflection of her unyielding determination. She was not merely a goddess seeking revenge, she was an avalanche, unstoppable and merciless. The Vanir began to falter. Their strength, though great, could not match the sheer force of Skadi's wrath. Njord, realizing the battle would lead only to ruin, called out to her. Skadi, stop. What would you have us do to end this bloodshed? Skadi paused, her bow still raised, an arrow poised to strike. Her eyes locked onto Njord's, and for a moment, the battlefield grew still. You cannot bring back what you've taken, she said, her voice cold and unwavering. But you will pay the price nonetheless. Njord lowered his weapon, his expression heavy with resignation. Name your terms, he said. Skadi's gaze swept over the Vanir, her eyes narrowing as she measured their worth. I demand reparation, she said. You will give me what I am owed, a husband of my choosing and laughter to replace the grief you have wrought. The gods exchanged uneasy glances but could not refuse. They had seen the ferocity of Skadi's power and knew they could not withstand it much longer. Njord stepped forward. Your terms will be met, he said. Skadi's lips curled into a thin, bitter smile. Good, she said, lowering her bow. But even as the battlefield fell silent, her heart remained heavy. Revenge had been sought, but the wound left by her father's death was one no victory could heal. As the Vanir retreated to fulfill her demands, Skadi stood alone once more, the wind howling around her. The battle was over, but her war was far from won. The mountains, her eternal companions, bore witness to her triumph and her sorrow. She had fought for honor, for justice, but the cost of her vengeance lingered, a shadow that would follow her always. The air was heavy with the smell of iron and earth. A low rumble echoed through the forest, a sound so unnatural it seemed to vibrate in the marrow of the bones. Sigurd stood at the edge of the dark woods, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword. Graham, forged with the blessings of gods and the sweat of mortal hands, gleamed faintly in the dim light. Ahead, the lair of Fafnir waited, a pit of death and shadows. He could hear the stories in his mind, the whispers of terrified villagers, the mournful cries of those who had lost everything. Fafnir, the dragon who once was a man, now a twisted, cursed beast. Greedy for gold, monstrous in both form and soul. A creature whose very breath scorched the earth, whose gaze turned brave men to quivering husks. Sigurd took a step forward, the weight of destiny pressing against his chest. He had no illusions of glory. This was not a battle for triumph or treasure. This was a reckoning. The forest fell silent as he approached the clearing. Trees bowed, their branches heavy with an invisible weight, as though they too feared what lay ahead. Then, from the depths of the earth, came the sound, a hiss so deep it rumbled like thunder. Fafnir was awake. The ground began to shake. Sigurd crouched low, steadying himself as the dragon emerged. Fafnir's body slithered from the shadows, his scales glinting like molten gold and his eyes burning with an unnatural fire. He was massive, his coils stretching endlessly, his claws carving grooves into the dirt. Smoke curled from his nostrils, rising in twisting plumes into the air. Sigurd's heart hammered in his chest, but his grip on Graham never wavered. The dragon's eyes locked onto him, and a guttural growl rumbled deep within its chest. "Another fool come to die," Fafnir hissed, his voice as ancient as the mountains. "What makes you think you are any different from the others who have perished beneath my claws?" Sigurd said nothing. Words would not win this battle. Instead, he raised Graham, the blade catching the light, a streak of silver against the darkness. He knew the dragon's weakness lay beneath its impenetrable scales and the soft underbelly that even its cursed transformation could not protect. Fafnir lunged, his massive jaws snapping shut with the force of a falling mountain. Sigurd rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. The dragon's tail whipped through the air, slicing through trees like brittle twigs. Sigurd leapt back, his feet sliding on the loose soil, but his focus never faltered. He needed the perfect moment. The dragon roared, shaking the heavens, and charged again. This time, Sigurd ran forward, his heart pounding like a war drum. He slid beneath the beast, feeling the searing heat of its body as he drove Graham upward. The blade struck true, slicing into Fafnir's belly. The dragon screamed, a sound so piercing it seemed to split the sky. Blood, dark and thick, poured from the wound, staining the ground and filling the air with its metallic stench. Fafnir writhed in pain, his body convulsing as he tried to shake Sigurd loose. But the warrior held on, driving the blade deeper, his teeth clenched with effort. With a final, bone-shaking roar, Fafnir collapsed. His massive body trembled once, twice, and then fell still. The earth groaned beneath his weight, and the forest exhaled, as though relieved of a great burden. Sigurd stood, his body aching and his hands slick with blood, both his own and the dragon's. He looked at the lifeless form of Fafnir, and for a moment, he felt no triumph, only a strange, hollow sorrow. The dragon had been a man once, consumed by greed and cursed for his sins. It was a grim reminder of the cost of power, of the fragile line between man and monster. But the battle was not yet over. The dragon's blood soaked into Sigurd's skin, seeping through every pore. It burned like fire, a searing pain that coursed through his veins. And with the pain came knowledge, a strange, otherworldly clarity. He could hear the whispers of the gods, feel their presence as though they stood beside him. The power of Fafnir's curse lingered, but so too did the wisdom it had guarded. Sigurd dropped to one knee, gasping for air as the knowledge overwhelmed him. He understood now why the gods had guided him here, why they had forged Graham for this very purpose. The dragon's death was not merely the end of a cursed beast, but the beginning of something far greater. Sigurd had become more than a man. He had become a symbol of courage, a force against the darkness that threatened both gods and mortals. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Sigurd rose. He walked away from the dragon's lifeless body, his steps heavy but resolute. Behind him, the forest began to stir, life returning to the land that had been gripped by fear for so long. The birds sang, their voices tentative at first, then growing stronger, as though celebrating a victory they could scarcely comprehend. Sigurd did not look back. There would be no song sung in his presence, no grand feast to honor his bravery. But he carried with him the weight of what he had done, the knowledge of what it meant. He had faced the impossible and triumphed, not for glory or riches, but for the hope that the light would always prevail over the darkness. And somewhere, in the halls of the gods, a quiet respect grew. They had seen Sigurd's battle, felt his pain, and witnessed his courage. His name would echo through the ages, whispered in awe by those who would come after. For in slaying the dragon, Sigurd had become a legend, a testament to the power of the human spirit and the unyielding strength of a hero's heart. The battlefield was soaked with blood, the air thick with the cries of men and the clash of steel. The Volsung family stood in the heart of the chaos, their banners whipping in the wind. Their enemies, vast in number, surged forward like a relentless tide, but the Volsungs held their ground. Their lineage was one of fire and vengeance, their destiny written in wounds and war cries. Sigmund, the patriarch, stood at the forefront, his sword glinting like a shard of the sun. Every swing of his blade carved through the enemy, but in his eyes burned a pain deeper than any wound, a foreboding that not even his strength could change the course of fate. The Volsungs were bound by blood and tragedy, each generation inheriting the scars of the last. Their story was one of resilience, but also of heartbreak. Sigmund had lost too much already: his father, his brothers, his kingdom. Now, standing in the heart of battle, he fought not only for victory but for the survival of his family's name. Yet the gods had other plans. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Sigmund found himself facing a foe unlike any he had encountered. A towering warrior clad in dark armor, his face obscured by a helmet adorned with cruel horns. The man moved with unnatural speed, his strikes precise and deadly. Sigmund parried, their blades sparking like fireflies in the dying light. For every blow he blocked, the warrior pressed harder, forcing Sigmund back step by step. Behind him, his son, Sinfjotli, fought with the ferocity of a wolf. His youth and raw strength cut through their enemies like a storm, but he was blind to the cunning of war. Sigmund glanced back, his heart lurching as he saw Sinfjotli surrounded, the enemy closing in. But he could not go to him, not yet. The warrior in dark armor lunged, and Sigmund felt the searing pain as the blade sliced into his side. He staggered but did not fall. Blood poured from the wound, staining his tunic, but he gripped his sword tighter. With a roar that shook the battlefield, he struck back, his blade finding a gap in the armor. The dark warrior fell, his blood mixing with the earth, but Sigmund's strength was fading. The battle raged on. The Volsungs fought like men possessed, their ferocity unmatched, but the cost was devastating. Sinfjotli, caught in the chaos, fought valiantly, his blade a blur of motion. Yet, as the enemies surrounded him, a spear found its mark, piercing his chest. He fell to his knees, his eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the ground. Sigmund's cry of anguish cut through the din of battle, a sound so raw it silenced even the gods. Grief gave him strength, and Sigmund fought like a man with nothing left to lose. His blade sang through the air, cutting down enemies with each swing, but his body could not keep up with his will. Another strike found him, and then another. He fell to one knee, his vision swimming, but his grip on his sword never faltered. As the last of the enemy fled, the battlefield grew quiet. Sigmund knelt in the blood-soaked dirt, his body broken but his spirit unyielding. He crawled to Sinfjotli, pulling his son's lifeless body into his arms. Tears carved trails through the dirt on his face as he whispered words only the wind could hear. He had fought for his family, for their honor, but the cost was more than he could bear. In that moment, a shadow fell over him. A figure approached, cloaked in light and mystery. It was Odin, the All-Father, his presence both commanding and sorrowful. He looked down at Sigmund, his one eye filled with a strange mix of pity and purpose. Odin raised his spear, Gungnir, and struck Gram, Sigmund's sword, shattering it into pieces. Sigmund understood. The gods had decreed this fate long before he had taken up arms. His time was over, but his legacy would not end here. With his dying breath, he thought of his unborn child, Sigurd, and the prophecy that surrounded him. The Volsungs would rise again, but not through him. His son would carry the weight of their name, their vengeance, their destiny. The wind swept over the battlefield, carrying the souls of the fallen. The Volsung banners, tattered and bloodied, still stood, a testament to their resilience. Sigmund lay still, his hand clutching the broken pieces of Gram. His body was broken, but his spirit remained, a flickering ember that would ignite the flames of a legend yet to be written. The story of the Volsungs did not end with Sigmund. It was only beginning. The sky churned with dark clouds, a forewarning of chaos to come. Thunder rumbled like the heartbeat of an enraged god, and lightning split the heavens, its blinding streaks casting jagged shadows over Asgard's golden spires. The air was thick with tension, a weight that pressed on every soul within the realm. All eyes turned to Thor, the god of thunder, as he stood atop the Bifrost, his hammer, Mjolnir, resting in his mighty hand. His eyes burned with a fire that could scorch mountains, and his jaw was set with unyielding determination. From the distance came the low growl of war drums, a sound that rose and fell like the tide. Then they appeared. The giants, enormous and merciless, emerged from the edge of the horizon, their grotesque forms towering like mountains. Their laughter echoed across the land, a sound that made the bravest warriors tremble. These were not mere foes, they were chaos incarnate, bent on the destruction of Asgard. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened. The giants had come too close to the gates of his home, too bold in their threats. He would not let Asgard fall. The gods watched in silence as he stepped forward, his cape billowing in the storm's fury. He did not speak, his resolve was louder than any words could be. The first clash came like an earthquake. A colossal frost giant swung a massive club of ice, its jagged edges glinting in the stormlight. Thor met the attack head-on, Mjolnir rising to intercept. The impact sent shockwaves through the air, shattering the ice and sending shards flying like deadly rain. Thor countered with a blow so fierce it splintered the ground beneath him, sending the giant tumbling into the abyss below. But there was no time to celebrate. Another giant, its body wreathed in fire, charged forward, its molten fists leaving scorched craters in their wake. Thor leaped into the air, his hammer spinning in a blur of deadly motion. He hurled Mjolnir with a roar, the hammer striking the fire giant square in the chest. The giant exploded into a cascade of embers, the remnants of its fury scattering into the wind. The battle only grew fiercer. The giants came in waves, each more formidable than the last. Some wielded weapons forged from the bones of ancient beasts, while others relied on sheer brute strength. They hurled boulders the size of houses and unleashed torrents of ice and fire. Yet, Thor stood unwavering, his hammer a force of nature. Each swing was a promise of protection, a vow to defend Asgard until his last breath. As the battle raged on, Thor found himself face to face with a giant unlike any other. Its eyes burned like twin suns, and its skin was as black as the void. This was Hrungnir, the strongest of the giants, his presence a challenge that could not be ignored. He carried a shield carved from a mountain and a weapon that glowed with an unearthly light. Hrungnir smirked, his voice a deep rumble. "Little thunder god, do you think you can stand against me? I will crush your precious Asgard and bury you beneath its ruins." Thor answered with action, not words. He charged, his hammer alight with the fury of storms. Hrungnir met him halfway, their clash sending shockwaves through the 9 realms. The ground cracked and splintered under their feet, and the sky roared in agony. Each blow was met with equal force, the air between them charged with raw power. Thor's strength was unmatched, but Hrungnir's size and cunning made him a formidable foe. The giant feinted, his weapon sweeping low to catch Thor off guard. The strike connected, sending the god sprawling across the battlefield. The gods watching from the walls of Asgard gasped, their hearts sinking. But Thor was not defeated. Rising slowly, he wiped blood from his lip and glared at Hrungnir. "You will not touch my home," he growled, his voice like rolling thunder. With a roar that shook the heavens, he hurled Mjolnir once more. This time, the hammer struck true, shattering Hrungnir's weapon and slamming into his chest. The giant staggered, his massive frame collapsing in a deafening crash. Thor stood over Hrungnir's broken form, his chest heaving with exertion. He raised Mjolnir high, summoning a bolt of lightning so fierce it turned night into day. The strike obliterated Hrungnir, leaving nothing but a scorched mark where he had fallen. The giants, witnessing their champion's defeat, faltered. Their once booming war cries faded to murmurs of doubt. Thor, bloodied but unbroken, turned to face them. His presence alone was enough to send them retreating, their massive forms vanishing into the storm from which they had come. As the storm subsided, Thor stood alone on the battlefield, his hammer resting at his side. The ground was littered with the remnants of the giants' assault, but Asgard's gates remained unbroken. The gods, filled with awe and gratitude, descended to meet their champion. Yet, Thor's gaze remained on the horizon, his heart heavy. He knew this would not be the last time the giants came for Asgard, but he also knew he would always stand between them and his home. Thor's battles were not just victories for the gods, they were a testament to his unyielding spirit, a promise etched in lightning and stone. As long as he stood, Asgard would endure. The air in Asgard was still, unnaturally calm, as if the very heavens held their breath. Baldur, the beloved son of Odin, stood amidst the gods, his presence a beacon of light that eased every troubled heart. His golden hair glimmered like the sun, and his laughter carried warmth that even the coldest soul could not resist. Yet, beneath this veneer of peace, an unseen shadow moved, weaving threads of betrayal and sorrow. Loki watched from the edges, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. He smirked, his thoughts hidden behind a mask of nonchalance. To everyone else, Loki was simply another god, mischievous but harmless. Yet, inside his restless mind, plans unfolded like venomous flowers. Baldur's light irritated him, the way it commanded love and reverence without effort. Envy burned deep in his chest, a fire that could not be quenched. Baldur, like many gods, was not without vulnerabilities, though they were carefully concealed. His mother, Frigg, had gone to every corner of the cosmos, securing promises from all things that they would not harm her son. Fire, water, stone, and metal, they had all sworn an oath. Baldur became untouchable, impervious to pain or death. But Frigg, in her desperation to protect her child, overlooked one small, insignificant thing, the mistletoe. Loki discovered this omission with cruel delight. It was such a small, fragile plant, and yet it could topple even the mighty Baldur. Loki's mind raced with possibilities, the thrill of his scheming electrifying his every thought. He fashioned a slender dart from the mistletoe, its tip sharp and cold. In his hands, it was nothing more than a simple weapon, but in his heart, it was an instrument of chaos. The gods often played games to test Baldur's invulnerability, throwing weapons at him that would bounce harmlessly away. Arrows snapped against his skin, boulders tumbled off his chest without leaving a mark, and spears shattered in midair. The laughter of the gods filled the halls of Asgard as they marveled at Baldur's untouchable form. Loki saw his moment during one of these games. He approached Hr, Baldur's blind brother, who stood apart from the others. Hr's face was lined with sadness, his inability to partake in the games leaving him isolated. Loki's voice was soft, almost kind, as he placed a hand on Hr's shoulder. "Why should you miss out on the fun?" Loki asked, his tone dripping with mock innocence. "Here, let me guide your hand. Throw this, and you too can join in the laughter." He pressed the mistletoe dart into Hr's hand, positioning him carefully. The other gods paid no attention, their focus was on Baldur, who stood smiling in the center of the commotion. Hr hesitated. "I cannot see," he whispered. "You don't need to," Loki replied, his grip tightening. "Trust me." The dart flew. It sliced through the air, silent and unseen, before piercing Baldur's chest. The moment froze, time itself recoiling in horror. Baldur's smile faltered, his bright eyes dimming as he stumbled backward. He clutched at the wound, confusion and pain etched across his face. A single gasp escaped his lips before he fell, his body crumpling to the ground like a fading star. The gods were paralyzed, their laughter replaced by silence so profound it felt like the end of the world. Frigg screamed, her voice shattering the stillness, a sound of pure anguish that echoed through the 9 realms. Odin's face, usually unyielding, was stricken with grief. The light of Asgard had been extinguished. The truth of what had happened unfolded slowly, like a cruel play. Hr, trembling, realized he had been a pawn in Loki's wicked game. The gods turned their fury on Loki, who met their rage with a sly grin. He did not flee, he reveled in the chaos he had created. Baldur was too perfect, Loki spat. Too bright. He cast shadows on the rest of us. Perhaps now, Asgard will see things more clearly. The gods captured Loki, their wrath boiling over. But punishment would not bring Baldur back. His lifeless body lay untouched by time, his beauty undiminished even in death. They placed him on a magnificent ship, its deck covered in flowers, and prepared to send him to the realm of hell. Fire licked at the edges of the pyre, consuming Baldur's earthly form as the gods wept openly. The consequences of Baldur's death were swift and unrelenting. Asgard, once a place of unity and strength, was now fractured. The grief of the gods turned to anger, and anger gave way to war. Loki fled, his cunning keeping him one step ahead of their vengeance, but the bonds of trust among the gods were forever broken. And so, the world trembled. The death of Baldur was not just the loss of a beloved god, it was the first crack in the foundation of Asgard, a wound that would never truly heal. In the heart of Asgard, a quiet sorrow clung to Freya. Her beauty was unparalleled, her grace unmatched, yet her heart bore a longing so profound it ached. She yearned not for power or conquest, but for something far deeper, a love that transcended the chaos of gods and mortals alike. It was during one of her restless wanderings that she came upon the treasure that would change everything, the Brisingamen. The necklace sparkled like captured starlight, each gem pulsing with a life of its own. It was the work of the dwarves, masters of the forge, and its beauty was said to rival even the creation of the gods. Freya's heart was stolen at the very first glance. But beauty, as she would soon learn, often comes with a price. The dwarves who had crafted Brisingamen were not ordinary beings. They were cunning, their greed for power as fierce as the flames of their forges. When Freya expressed her desire for the necklace, they made her an offer as bold as it was cruel. They would part with the Brisingamen, but only if she spent a night with each of them. Freya's soul recoiled at the thought. She, a goddess of love and fertility, was not unfamiliar with passion, but the proposition struck at her dignity. Yet, the longing in her heart outweighed her pride. The Brisingamen was more than a piece of jewelry, it felt like a piece of her own soul, something she was meant to possess. She agreed, though the decision haunted her. When Freya finally clasped the Brisingamen around her neck, it was as if the stars themselves bowed to her radiance. The necklace enhanced her beauty, making her even more enchanting. But the weight of what she had done to obtain it never left her. The gods, quick to notice her unease, began to whisper. Among them, none whispered louder than Loki. Loki, ever the trickster, saw an opportunity to sow discord. He spread rumors, each more insidious than the last, until the gods began to question Freya's loyalty and her purity. Freya, who had always stood proud and unshaken, found herself on the defensive, her every action scrutinized. Her love for Brisingamen became a symbol of vanity in the eyes of others, a weakness that made her vulnerable. One night, as Freya sat alone, cradling the necklace in her hands, Loki struck. Slipping through the shadows, he crept into her chambers and stole the Brisingamen. By the time Freya realized it was gone, Loki had disappeared into the night, leaving her bereft and humiliated. The loss ignited something fierce in Freya. Her sorrow transformed into anger, a burning rage that would not be extinguished. She stormed into the halls of Asgard, demanding justice. Odin, ever the arbiter, listened to her cries, but hesitated to act. Loki was not an easy foe, and the theft of a necklace seemed trivial compared to the battles raging across the realms. But Freya was relentless. Finally, Odin made her an offer. If she could find Loki and retrieve the Brisingamen herself, he would ensure the gods did not question her worth again. The task was daunting, but Freya accepted without hesitation. She was determined to reclaim not just the necklace, but her honor. Tracking Loki was no easy feat. The trickster had hidden himself in Midgard, using his shape-shifting abilities to evade capture. Freya called upon her own magic, taking the form of a falcon to scour the lands. She searched tirelessly, her resolve unwavering despite the physical and emotional toll. When she finally found Loki, he was in the form of a seal, hiding among the rocks near a desolate shore. Freya wasted no time. She transformed back into her true form and confronted him, her eyes blazing with fury. Loki, as always, tried to talk his way out, spinning lies and offering excuses. But Freya was not swayed. She lunged at him, her hands outstretched to seize the necklace. The struggle was fierce. Loki shifted forms, becoming a snake, then a wolf, and finally a firestorm, but Freya fought with a strength born of sheer determination. She endured burns, bites, and exhaustion, her focus never wavering. Finally, in a moment of pure will, she trapped Loki in a magical bind, forcing him back into his original form. With trembling hands, she pried the Brisingamen from his grasp. As she held it once more, a wave of relief and sorrow washed over her. The necklace was hers again, but the battles she had fought, both with others and within herself, had changed her. The Brisingamen sparkled as brightly as ever, but now it seemed heavier, as if it carried the weight of her trials. When Freya returned to Asgard, the gods greeted her with a mix of awe and respect. She had proven her strength, her resilience, and her unwavering devotion to what she held dear. Yet, even as they celebrated her victory, Freya felt a lingering sadness. The Brisingamen, once a symbol of beauty and love, now reminded her of the sacrifices she had made. The sky burned with an eerie, unholy glow, as if the heavens themselves wept for what was about to unfold. Across the land, silence reigned, heavy, oppressive, and filled with the weight of inevitable doom. This was not just a battle, it was the end of all things. The prophecy of Ragnarok, whispered in fear for ages, was finally coming to pass. The ground trembled violently as the great wolf Fenrir broke free from his chains. His jaws stretched so wide that they scraped both earth and sky, his hunger insatiable and his rage unrelenting. His howls shook the cosmos, echoing across the 9 realms, a bone-chilling call to war. At his side, the serpent Jormungandr coiled and writhed, its colossal body encircling Midgard, poison dripping from its fangs and tainting the seas. The giants of Jotunheim marched behind them, their monstrous forms blotting out the horizon, their eyes gleaming with hatred long nurtured. In Asgard, the gods prepared. Odin, the All-Father, stood at the gates of Valhalla, his one eye scanning the horizon for the advancing doom. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, circled above, their cries sharp and sorrowful. He knew what was to come, he had always known. Yet, knowledge did not lessen the burden of fate. Beside him, Thor gripped Mjolnir tightly, his knuckles white, his face a mask of unyielding determination. His heart was heavy, but his spirit burned with the fiery resolve to protect his people, no matter the cost. The Bifrost Bridge shattered under the weight of Surtur, the fire giant, his flaming sword lighting the skies ablaze. His every step left trails of molten earth, the heat of his presence suffocating. Heimdall, the ever-watchful guardian, stood tall at his post, his golden horn Gjallarhorn raised high. With a mighty blow, he sounded the call to arms, the mournful note ringing through the air, signaling the beginning of the end. The gods of Asgard charged into battle, their courage a defiant flame against the overwhelming darkness. Frey, armed with the enchanted blade that gleamed like the sun, faced Surtur. Though his strength was great, the fire giant's wrath was greater, and the clash of their powers turned the battlefield into a hellish inferno. Thor sought out Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, his eternal nemesis. Their confrontation was a tempest of thunder and venom, the sky splitting open with every strike of Mjolnir. Thor fought with all his might, his every blow shaking the earth, but the serpent's poison seeped into his veins, each breath becoming harder than the last. Odin confronted Fenrir, the wolf that had haunted his visions for centuries. Spear in hand, the All-Father battled fiercely, his wisdom guiding each strike. But Fenrir was a beast born of chaos, his strength unmatched, his fury unrelenting. As Odin fell, devoured by the monstrous jaws, the light in the sky dimmed, and the gods' spirits wavered. The Valkyries descended, their shimmering forms slicing through the chaos, carrying the souls of fallen warriors to Valhalla. Yet even they could not stem the tide of destruction. The giants pushed forward, their roars drowning out the cries of the dying. The air was thick with ash and blood, the once pristine lands of Asgard reduced to ruins. Loki, the trickster, fought on the side of the giants, his betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. He faced Heimdall in a duel that shook the heavens. The two opponents, evenly matched, struck with a ferocity born of old grudges. Their final blows landed simultaneously, and they fell together, their lifeless bodies locked in an eternal embrace of enmity. Surtur reached the heart of Asgard, his flaming sword raised high. With a single devastating strike, he unleashed the fire that would consume the world. The flames spread rapidly, devouring everything in their path, leaving nothing but ash and despair. The gods fought valiantly, but the prophecy could not be undone. In the chaos, Baldur, the shining god, returned from Hel's domain, his presence a fleeting glimmer of hope. Yet even his radiant light could not stop the inevitable. As the fire consumed Asgard, the surviving gods and mortals looked on, their hearts heavy with sorrow and regret. The earth quaked one final time, splitting apart as the oceans rose to swallow the land. The sun and moon were devoured by the wolf Skoll and Hati, plunging the world into darkness. The stars fell from the heavens, their light extinguished forever. The great tree Yggdrasil trembled, its ancient branches breaking under the weight of the destruction. And then, silence. A heavy, suffocating stillness. The world had fallen, the gods had perished, and the prophecy had been fulfilled. Yet, amidst the ash and ruin, a faint glimmer of something new stirred, hidden within the desolation. The sky blazed with light as Sol, the radiant goddess of the sun, raced across the heavens in her chariot of fire. Her golden hair shimmered with the brilliance of dawn, her face fierce with unrelenting determination. Behind her, Skoll, the monstrous wolf, pursued relentlessly, his massive paws pounding against the unseen road of the sky. His snarls echoed through the air, a haunting reminder of the eternal chase that held the balance of the world. Each day began with this race, a desperate, unending flight for survival. Sol's chariot, drawn by her fiery steeds Arvakr and Alsver, streaked across the sky, their hooves leaving trails of molten light. The sun's warmth kissed the earth below, bringing life and hope to all who depended on its glow. But behind her, Skoll's shadow loomed, cold and merciless, threatening to devour everything in his path. The wolf-sized burned like embers, his jaws wide enough to swallow the sun whole. He was not just a creature of hunger, he was the embodiment of doom, a force born to destroy. His breath chilled the air, and his growls sent shivers through the hearts of gods and mortals alike. He wanted nothing less than to end Sol's light, to bring an endless night that would blanket the world in darkness. Sol glanced back, her heart pounding with fear and resolve. She could feel the heat of Skoll's breath, the closeness of his snapping jaws. The chariot buckled under the strain of their speed, but Sol held firm, her hands gripping the reins tightly. She had no choice but to keep moving, for to falter was to lose everything. As the chase continued, the world below responded to their battle. Forests awakened with golden hues as Sol's light touched their leaves, while icy winds followed Skoll's shadow, freezing rivers in an instant. Farmers paused in their fields, their faces lifted toward the sky, silently praying for Sol to win another day. Children pointed at the streaks of fire above, unaware of the stakes riding on this daily war. Skoll lunged, his massive body surging forward, his jaws snapping inches from the chariot's wheels. Sol cracked the reins, urging Arvakr and Alsver to go faster. The fiery horses neighed in defiance, their strength fueled by the goddess's will. The chariot surged ahead, pulling them just out of the wolf's reach. Skoll howled in frustration, his voice shaking the clouds and scattering flocks of birds. But Sol knew he would never stop. This was his purpose, his curse. He was bound to her as she was to him, locked in a dance that could end only in tragedy. Still, she refused to give in. The world needed her light, the warmth that banished the cold, the hope that chased away despair. She could not, would not, let the wolf win. There were moments when the chase slowed, when the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. These moments, though brief, were Sol's only respite. She could feel the weight of her task then, the crushing loneliness of a battle fought alone. The gods watched from their thrones, powerless to intervene, while the mortals below offered silent thanks but little else. It was Sol who bore the burden, who faced Skoll's wrath day after day, knowing there was no end to his pursuit. One evening, as the sun set and the horizon burned with fading light, Skoll came closer than ever before. His teeth grazed the edge of the chariot, sending sparks flying into the twilight. Sol's heart raced as she pulled the reins with all her strength, willing her horses to climb higher into the sky. The chariot groaned under the strain, its wheels glowing red-hot. Skoll's growls turned into a roar, his fury shaking the heavens. For a moment, it seemed as though all was lost. Skoll's jaws opened wide, ready to consume the sun and plunge the world into darkness. But then, as if summoned by her desperate will, a burst of light erupted from Sol's chariot. It was blinding, brilliant, a force of life itself. The wolf recoiled, his snarls turning into pained whimpers as the light seared his eyes. Sol surged forward, her chariot ascending into the heavens, leaving Skoll to retreat into the shadows. The world below exhaled in relief as the sun's light returned, stronger than before. The mortals cheered, the gods nodded in quiet approval, and the earth seemed to breathe again. But Sol did not celebrate. She knew this victory was temporary, that Skoll would return with the dawn, his hunger unabated. Her fight was far from over. As night fell, Sol rested for a fleeting moment, her body wearied but her spirit unbroken. She looked to the stars, her silent companions in the endless sky, and drew strength from their light. Her task was eternal, but so was her resolve. Skoll might chase her, might threaten to end her light, but he would never extinguish her will. The sun would rise again, and so would she. The bridge to Asgard shimmered under the pale light of the cosmos. Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, stood as the lone passage between the worlds, its vibrant colors masking the weighted boar. At its edge, Heimdall stood unyielding, his sword in hand, his golden eyes scanning the vast expanse of the horizon. He could hear it, the whispers of chaos, the growing thunder of an approaching storm. They were coming. Heimdall was the gatekeeper, the watcher of the gods, the sentinel whose sight pierced through the fabric of space and time. He was not just a guardian, he was a force, unshakable and steadfast. His senses picked up every sound, every flicker of movement, long before it reached the gates of Asgard. And now, those senses warned of an inevitable clash. The air grew heavy, charged with the tension of an impending battle. From the shadows of the distant lands, an army began to emerge. They were monstrous and unrelenting, giants, beasts, and warriors corrupted by chaos. At their forefront stood Loki, his smile wicked and his eyes aflame with treachery. This was no mere attack, this was betrayal at its most vicious, a brother-turned-enemy bringing destruction to the very home he once called his own. Heimdall tightened his grip on his sword, Hofund, its blade gleaming with an inner light. There was no hesitation in his stance, no flicker of doubt. He had been waiting for this moment, for the day when he would be called upon to defend what could not be replaced. As Loki stepped forward, his voice carried across the bridge, smooth and taunting. "Stand aside, Heimdall," Loki said, his words curling like smoke in the air. "You know this is futile. Asgard will fall. Even you cannot hold back the tide." Heimdall's reply was steady, unshaken. "Your tricks end here, Loki. You will not pass." Loki's smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by a flash of annoyance. He gestured, and the horde surged forward. Giants roared as they charged, their massive weapons raised high. Beasts snarled, their claws tearing at the ground. The bridge trembled under their weight, but Heimdall stood firm, his gaze unwavering. The first wave reached him, and Hofund flashed like lightning. Heimdall moved with precision, his strike swift and lethal. Giants fell, their roars silenced by the sharp edge of his blade. Beasts lunged, only to be met with the unyielding strength of his shield. The bridge seemed to come alive beneath his feet, its colors glowing brighter as if responding to his resolve. Loki watched from afar, his expression unreadable. This was not a skirmish to him, it was a game, a chessboard where every piece had a purpose. But Heimdall was no pawn. He was the wall Loki needed to break, and every moment that wall held cost him. The horde came in waves, unending and relentless. Heimdall fought on, his breath steady, his movements a perfect balance of strength and grace. Yet even a warrior as steadfast as he could not ignore the toll. His arm grew heavy, his muscles burning with exertion. Blood stained the bridge, both his enemies and his own. Still, he did not falter. Loki finally stepped forward, his patience worn thin. He approached with a confidence born of arrogance, his daggers gleaming in the light of Bifrost. Heimdall turned to face him, their eyes locking. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, the traitor and the defender. You cannot stop what is already in motion, Loki said, his voice laced with venom. This is the end, Heimdall. For you, for Asgard, for everything. Heimdall raised Hofund, his voice calm but filled with an unshakable resolve. If this is the end, I will face it standing. You will not take this bridge, Loki. Their clash was thunder and fire, the collision of two forces destined to meet. Loki was quick, his movements a blur as he struck with precision and cunning. Heimdall countered with sheer strength and unerring focus, his blade meeting Loki's daggers in a shower of sparks. They moved across the bridge in a deadly dance, each strike carrying the weight of their fates. Loki's laughter rang out, mocking and cruel, but there was a frustration beneath it. Heimdall was unrelenting, his defenses impenetrable. The bridge itself seemed to side with its guardian, its glow intensifying with every blow he parried. Yet Loki was no ordinary foe. His tricks, his deceit, were weapons as sharp as any blade. A flick of Loki's wrist sent a dagger spinning toward Heimdall's chest. The gatekeeper deflected it, but the motion left him open for a split second. Loki took his chance, lunging forward with a strike aimed at Heimdall's side. Pain flared as the blade found its mark, but Heimdall did not fall. He turned, his sword arcing in a brilliant sweep that forced Loki back. Blood dripped onto the bridge, but Heimdall stood tall, his eyes blazing with determination. Loki's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of something almost like doubt. The horde hesitated, their momentum slowed by the sight of their leader being pushed back. You cannot win, Heimdall said, his voice steady despite the pain. Not here. Not today. Loki snarled, his anger boiling over. He lunged again, his strikes wild and furious. But Heimdall met each one with unwavering resolve, his blade cutting through the chaos. The bridge shone brighter, its colors a beacon in the darkness, a testament to the strength of its guardian. The battle raged on, fierce and unrelenting. Heimdall's body ached, his wounds bleeding freely, but his spirit remained unbroken. He fought not for himself, but for the home he had sworn to protect, for the gods who relied on his vigilance, for the world that needed Asgard's light. As the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, the horde began to falter. The giants retreated, their confidence shaken. The beasts howled in frustration, their fury dimming. Loki stepped back, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. Heimdall stood before him, bloodied but unyielding, a living embodiment of defiance. Though the battle was not over, one truth was clear: as long as Heimdall stood, Bifrost would not fall. And in that moment, even Loki, the trickster, could not deny the strength of the gatekeeper. The fire flickered in the great hall of Asgard, casting long shadows on the walls where the gods feasted. Their laughter echoed, a symphony of power and camaraderie. Yet, amidst the joy, there was always one figure whose presence was a question, whose smile could shift from charm to menace in the blink of an eye. Loki sat at the table, his eyes gleaming with mischief, a wolf among lions. He raised his cup, his grin sly and sharp, but beneath it lay an edge of something far darker. Loki was not like the others. He belonged, but only just. A son of giants, yet blood brother to Odin, he was a god and a stranger all at once. His wit was unmatched, his cunning a blade that cut sharper than any sword. The gods valued his cleverness when it served them, yet they watched him always, wary of the chaos he carried like a storm waiting to break. And break it did. Again and again. It began with whispers, small cracks in the harmony of Asgard. A missing treasure here, a misplaced word there. Loki's hand was always in the shadows, twisting events to his liking. One day it was Thor, his mighty hammer stolen and hidden in the halls of a giant. Thor's rage shook the heavens, but it was Loki who proposed the plan to retrieve it. Disguised as a bride, Thor infiltrated the enemy's lair, his strength eventually shattering the deceit. But even as Mjolnir returned to his grip, the laughter of Loki lingered, a reminder that the trickster's games had brought them to that moment. Then there was the building of Asgard's great wall. A stranger, promising to construct an impenetrable fortress in exchange for the sun, the moon, and Freya herself, appeared at Odin's gates. The gods were tempted but wary. It was Loki who spoke up, his voice dripping with confidence. "Let the stranger build," he said, "for no one could complete such a task in the allotted time." The gods agreed, and the stranger began his work. But when the wall neared completion, the truth came out. The stranger was no mere builder, but a giant in disguise. Loki, to save himself from the wrath of the gods, shifted into a mare and lured away the giant's horse, halting the construction. The wall was unfinished, Asgard was safe, and Loki returned bearing more than just a tail. He brought with him a strange foal, Sleipnir, an 8-legged steed destined to serve Odin himself. The gods celebrated, but their laughter was tinged with unease. Loki had saved them, yes, but his methods had once again blurred the line between loyalty and betrayal. Yet the cracks widened. His tricks became darker, his laughter sharper. One fateful day, his jealousy and pride reached their peak, and Balder, the shining god, became the victim of his cruelty. Balder, beloved by all, had been made invulnerable by his mother's magic. No weapon, no stone could harm him. The gods delighted in testing this invincibility, throwing spears and stones that bounced harmlessly off his skin. But Loki saw an opportunity. He discovered that mistletoe, a humble plant, was the only thing that could wound Balder. With a sly grin, he fashioned a dart and handed it to Hod, Balder's blind brother. Guiding Hod's hand, Loki sent the dart flying, and it struck true. Balder fell, lifeless, his light extinguished. The hall was silent, the air heavy with shock and grief. Loki's grin faded as the gods turned to him, their eyes blazing with fury. He had crossed a line that could not be undone. From that moment, Loki's place in Asgard was no longer a question, it was an open wound. They hunted him, their wrath unyielding. Loki fled, hiding in the mountains, shifting his shape to evade capture. He became a salmon, slipping through the rivers, a bird soaring through the skies. But the gods would not rest, and at last, they cornered him. Bound with the entrails of his own son, a serpent placed above his head to drip venom onto his face, Loki's punishment was as cruel as his crimes. His wife, Sigyn, stayed by his side, catching the venom in a bowl, her devotion a flicker of light in the darkness. But Loki's story did not end there. As Ragnarok approached, the bonds that held him weakened, the serpent's venom burning less fiercely. Chaos stirred once more as Loki broke free, his hatred for the gods now a blazing fire. He would lead the armies of destruction, guiding giants and monsters alike to the gates of Asgard. Heimdall, ever watchful, stood in his path. The two faced each other, their fates intertwined in a battle foretold. Loki's daggers clashed with Heimdall's sword, their strikes shaking the very bridge they fought upon. They were equals, each strike met with another, each move countered with precision. Yet fate demanded a price, and in the end, they fell together, their final breaths echoing the cost of their eternal enmity. Loki's life was a tapestry of contradictions, woven with threads of loyalty and treachery, laughter and cruelty. He was a god and a traitor, a savior and a destroyer. Even as the world fell into chaos, his presence lingered, a reminder of the fragile line between order and chaos, between creation and destruction. The air was heavy with tension, the mountain peaks shrouded in a menacing mist. Thunder rumbled in the distance, not from the skies, but from the ground itself. The earth seemed to shudder under the weight of something colossal, something waiting. And at the heart of it all stood Thor, Mjolnir resting in his hand like a living extension of his will. His crimson cape snapped in the cold wind, his eyes blazing with the promise of battle. This was no ordinary mountain. It was a stronghold, carved by giants, their fortress of defiance against the gods of Asgard. They loomed over the land like shadowed titans, their laughter echoing like falling boulders. For centuries, these creatures had tested the boundaries of power, taunting the gods, challenging their dominion. But no challenge had ever gone unanswered by Thor, the protector of Asgard, the storm embodied. The first blow came not from Thor but from the mountain itself. Rocks rained down like spears, hurled by hands as large as houses. The ground split apart, threatening to swallow him whole. Thor stood firm, his feet planted like roots in the trembling earth. With a roar that rivaled the storm, he raised Mjolnir high, and the hammer sang as it met the air. Lightning exploded across the heavens, cutting through the mist and striking the mountainside. The rocks shattered, their threat reduced to harmless rubble. Emerging from the shadows, the giants revealed themselves. Their forms were monstrous, skin like craggy stone, eyes burning like molten lava. Each step they took was an earthquake, each breath a gale. Leading them was Hrungnir, a giant whose arrogance was as vast as his size. He laughed at Thor, mocking his stature, belittling the gods who dared to challenge the might of Jotunheim. Thor said nothing. Words were wasted on foes like these. Instead, he leaped forward, Mjolnir blazing like the sun. The first strike landed with a sound that shook the heavens, the hammer meeting Hrungnir's massive shield. Sparks flew, illuminating the battlefield like fleeting stars. The clash was a symphony of destruction, each strike a note that promised chaos and retribution. Hrungnir countered with a stone club, its weight capable of crushing mountains. Thor dodged with a speed that defied his powerful frame, each movement calculated, precise. He was not merely a warrior, he was a storm in flesh, his rage controlled but relentless. The battle raged on, the mountain trembling under the fury of their fight. Smaller giants tried to intervene, but Thor swung Mjolnir in a wide arc, the hammer breaking bones and scattering them like leaves before a hurricane. He fought with a ferocity that left no doubt. This was not just a battle for pride or vengeance. It was a battle for Asgard's safety, for the honor of the gods, for the delicate balance of the worlds. Hrungnir, too, fought with determination, his strength a challenge even to Thor. He landed a crushing blow that sent Thor skidding across the rocky ground, his armor dented, blood seeping from a wound. For a moment, the giants cheered, their roars shaking the mountains. But Thor rose, his eyes sharper than before, his grip on Mjolnir unyielding. With a war cry that seemed to pierce the fabric of the sky, Thor charged. Lightning coursed through him, making him a beacon of power and resolve. Mjolnir struck Hrungnir's club, shattering it into countless pieces. The force of the blow sent Hrungnir staggering, and before he could recover, Thor unleashed the full wrath of the storm. Mjolnir struck his chest with such force that the giant's heart seemed to explode, his massive frame collapsing like a felled tree. The giants froze, their leader defeated. Thor's silhouette stood against the backdrop of flashing lightning, his breath heavy but steady. There was no mercy in his gaze, only the resolve of a protector. He turned to the remaining giants, and with one final strike of his hammer, the mountain itself seemed to collapse inward, the fortress of chaos crumbling into dust. The storm that had raged in Thor's heart began to calm, the echoes of battle fading into the cold wind. The mountain was silent now, its threats vanquished. Yet, Thor remained for a moment longer, his gaze sweeping across the ruins. He did not fight for glory or recognition, his purpose was clear. He fought so the gods could sleep soundly, so Asgard could stand unshaken, so the fragile threads of the worlds would not unravel. As he descended the mountain, the clouds began to part, and the first rays of the sun touched the peaks. The air was still, as if the land itself was holding its breath in reverence. Thor walked away, not as a victor basking in triumph, but as a guardian prepared for the next challenge, Mjolnir in hand, the storm always at his command. The battlefield stretched as far as the eye could see, a desolate expanse of frost-kissed earth and shattered trees. The air was sharp and bitter, filled with the tang of iron and the distant hum of war drums. In the silence before chaos, Freyr stood at the heart of his army. His presence was commanding, not through brute force, but through the calm authority in his gaze. He carried no arrogance, only a deep understanding of the stakes at hand. This was not just a battle, it was a war for balance, for the very fabric of existence. The war between the Vanir and the Aesir gods was born of mistrust, a rift that had torn through the heavens. Both sides were mighty, their powers vast, but Freyr had something the others lacked, an innate connection to the natural world and a mind that could see beyond violence. He was not just a warrior, he was a strategist, a leader who understood that victory was not measured in bloodshed alone but in what remained after the final blow. The Aesir forces approached, their march shaking the ground like the steps of giants. Freyr watched them from the ridge, his golden hair catching the faint light of the setting sun. His hand rested on his sword, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating every possible move. Around him, his warriors, brave and loyal, waited in tense silence, trusting their leader's judgment. He had led them through countless skirmishes, each time outmaneuvering the Aesir with tactics that seemed almost magical in their precision. As the enemy closed in, Freyr signaled his commanders. There were no grand speeches, no fiery declarations of victory. Instead, there was a quiet nod, a look in his eyes that spoke volumes. He believed in them, and that belief was enough to steady their hearts. The Vanir forces began to move, not in chaotic charges, but in carefully orchestrated waves, their movements like the flowing of rivers. They used the terrain to their advantage, weaving through the forests, hiding in the shadows of hills, striking where the Aesir least expected. The first clash was thunderous, the sound of swords meeting shields echoing across the valley. Freyr remained at the rear, his eyes scanning the battlefield with the precision of a hawk. He saw not just the chaos, but the patterns within it, the weaknesses in the Aesir's formations, the overconfidence in their ranks. He sent swift runners with messages, adjusting his strategies in real time, each decision calculated to turn the tide. Freyr's genius was not just in his planning but in his understanding of his enemies. He knew the Aesir were proud, their strength unmatched, but their patience thin. He exploited this, drawing them into traps, forcing them to fight on unfavorable ground. At one point, a contingent of Aesir warriors charged into what seemed like an unprotected flank, only to find themselves surrounded by Vanir archers hidden in the trees. Arrows rained down like a deadly storm, the Aesir retreating in disarray. The tide of battle shifted constantly, moments of fierce fighting followed by eerie lulls. Freyr walked among his soldiers during these pauses, his calm presence a beacon. He stopped to lift a fallen shield, to speak softly to a wounded warrior, his actions inspiring as much as his strategies. He knew that wars were not won by gods alone, but by the hearts of those who fought alongside them. Then came the moment Freyr had anticipated. The Aesir, frustrated by their inability to overpower the Vanir, sent their fiercest warriors to break the stalemate. Among them was Thor, his hammer Mjolnir crackling with lightning, a force of nature that had turned the tide in countless battles. Freyr watched Thor's approach with a steady gaze, his hand tightening on his sword's hilt. He did not fear the storm, he planned to weather it. Freyr ordered his warriors to fall back, creating the illusion of retreat. The Aesir surged forward, their confidence swelling. But Freyr had set the stage perfectly. As the Aesir pushed into the narrow valley, the Vanir unleashed their hidden forces, attacking from above and below, cutting off their escape routes. It was a masterstroke, the kind of maneuver that turned battles into legends. In the heart of the chaos, Freyr faced Thor. It was a clash of titans, not just of strength, but of wills. Thor's strikes were furious, each swing of his hammer capable of leveling mountains. Freyr countered with precision, his movements a dance of grace and power. He used the terrain to his advantage, forcing Thor into positions where his strength became a liability. Their battle was not one of hatred but of opposing forces, two warriors fighting for what they believed in. The earth trembled under their fight, the air thick with the energy of their powers. Freyr did not seek to defeat Thor but to hold him, to distract him long enough for his strategy to unfold. And it did. The Vanir forces, emboldened by their leader's stand, overwhelmed the Aesir, turning their strength against them. The tide of the battle shifted decisively, the Aesir retreating in the face of the Vanir's relentless advance. As the battle subsided, Freyr stood among the ruins, his sword lowered but his spirit unbroken. He had led his people through one of the fiercest conflicts the gods had ever seen, not with brute force, but with wisdom and resolve. His warriors gathered around him, their eyes filled with respect and gratitude. Freyr did not smile, for he knew the cost of war, but he allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. He had done what he must, not for glory, but for the survival of his people and the balance of their world. The battlefield roared with the sounds of chaos, shields clashing, swords cutting through the air, and the guttural cries of warriors locked in combat. Among the ranks of the Norse warriors, there were figures whose presence was as fierce as the storm above. Their braided hair was streaked with blood and sweat, and their eyes gleamed with unrelenting resolve. These were the shield maidens, women who did not wait for glory to come to them. They seized it with their own hands, unyielding, unafraid. One such shield maiden stood at the heart of the fray. Her name was Hervair, and her reputation as a warrior was whispered in both reverence and fear. She gripped her shield tight, the dragon emblem on its face already scarred from countless battles. Her sword, a weapon forged in the fires of legends, seemed to hum with its own deadly hunger. Hervair did not fight for conquest or riches. Her fight was for honor, for her place in the tales that would echo through eternity. The enemy surged forward, a wall of steel and fury. Hervair met them with a cry that pierced through the chaos like a thunderclap. She charged, her shield raised, her blade flashing in a lethal arc. Around her, her sisters in arms moved with equal precision and ferocity, their ranks as tight as the links of a chain. These were women who had trained not just their bodies, but their minds, who had learned to see the rhythm of battle and to move within it like water through a stream. The shield maidens were not mere soldiers, they were a force of nature. They fought with a unity that seemed almost otherworldly, each movement a part of a greater whole. When one raised her shield, another struck. When one fell, another took her place without hesitation. It was a dance of death, beautiful and terrifying, and their enemies could do little but stagger under the weight of their assault. Hervair's blade found its mark, cutting through an enemy's armor as if it were paper. She moved on instinct, her senses heightened to a razor's edge. A sword came for her side, but she pivoted, using her shield to deflect the blow before countering with a strike that sent her opponent crumbling to the ground. Around her, the battlefield was a swirling tempest of blood and mud, but Hervair was steady, unshakable. In the brief moments between clashes, Hervair would glance at her comrades. There was Astrid, her golden hair now streaked with grime, her spear moving with deadly precision. There was Sigrid, her laughter sharp and wild as she cut down yet another foe, as though the chaos fed her spirit. They fought with a bond forged not in peace, but in fire, each trusting the other with their lives. The shield maiden's strength was not just in their skill, but in their defiance. In a world that sought to confine them to quiet lives, they had chosen the roar of the battlefield. They had chosen to carve their stories into the sagas alongside gods and kings. Their shields bore the scars of countless battles, each mark a testament to their resilience. Their swords were not just weapons, but extensions of their will, unyielding and unbroken. But the battle was far from over. A massive warrior emerged from the enemy ranks, his armor black as the night, his axe heavy enough to split a shield in two. His eyes locked on Hervair, and for a moment, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Hervair stood her ground, her grip tightening on her sword. She did not falter. She did not hesitate. The clash between them was like a storm unleashed. The warrior's axe came down with a force that shook the earth, but Hervair met it with her shield, the impact reverberating through her bones. She countered with a strike aimed at his side, but he was fast, his movements belying his massive frame. They circled each other, every step calculated, every strike a test of the other's resolve. Around them, the battle raged on, but it seemed distant, a mere echo to the intensity of their duel. Hervair's breath came in ragged gasps, her muscles screaming in protest, but she refused to yield. This was her fight, her moment, and she would not let it slip away. The warrior swung his axe again, aiming for her head, but Hervair ducked under the blow, her sword striking out in a desperate arc. It caught him across the chest, his armor splitting with a screech. He staggered, his eyes wide with shock, and in that moment, Hervair pressed her advantage. Her blade struck again, and the giant fell, his axe slipping from his grasp as he crumpled to the ground. Hervair stood over him, her chest heaving, her sword dripping with blood. She did not revel in her victory, there was no time for that. Instead, she turned back to the battlefield, raising her sword high. Her cry rallied her sisters, their voices joining hers in a chorus that shook their enemies to their core. The tide of the battle turned, the shield maidens driving their foes back with unrelenting force. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the battlefield was theirs. The shield maidens stood together, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. Hervair lowered her sword, the weight of the day settling over her. She looked at her comrades, at Astrid and Sigrid, at the faces of those who had fought beside her and those who had fallen. They had won, but the cost was heavy, as it always was. The Shield Maidens did not fight for glory alone. They fought for each other, for the bonds that could not be broken by death or despair. They fought for the stories that would be told long after they were gone, stories of women who stood tall against the storms of war and emerged as legends. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. The gods gathered in silence, their faces tense and filled with unspoken fear. Before them loomed Fenrir, the giant wolf, his massive body rippling with raw power. His eyes burned like twin embers, unyielding and furious, as though he already knew what they planned to do. Fenrir had grown beyond anyone's control, his strength a threat to gods and men alike. No chain could hold him for long, and his hunger for destruction seemed boundless. Each attempt to restrain him had failed, and with each failure, his wrath grew. Yet there was one among them who was willing to risk everything to change that, Tyr, the god of war and justice. Tyr stepped forward, his movements deliberate, each step carrying the weight of his decision. He was not the largest among the gods, nor the strongest, but his courage set him apart. The others exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes betraying their doubt and fear. No one dared speak, for what could they say? They knew what this task demanded. Fenrir's growl rumbled through the ground, a sound that made even the bravest shiver. What now? The wolf snarled, his voice low and menacing. Another chain? Another trick? You think I don't see what you plan? The gods held out the gleaming ribbon known as Gleipnir, a chain unlike any other. It was light as silk, yet woven with magic stronger than steel. Forged by the dwarves, it was crafted from the whispers of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, and other impossible things. To the eye, it looked harmless, but its power lay hidden beneath its deceptive simplicity. Fenrir's lips curled into a mocking grin. You think this will hold me? I am no fool. I'll submit to your game, but only if one of you places their hand in my mouth as a pledge of trust. If this ribbon is a trap, I'll bite it off. A cold silence fell over the gods. No one moved. Fenrir's challenge hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. The wolf's teeth, sharp as blades, glinted in the fading light. No one was willing to risk such a price, no one but Tyr. Without hesitation, Tyr stepped forward. His face was calm, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. He extended his arm toward Fenrir, his hand steady as he placed it between the wolf's jaws. For a moment, Fenrir hesitated, his amber eyes locking with Tyr's. There was something in the god's gaze, something unspoken, unflinching. You trust too easily, Fenrir sneered, clamping his jaws just enough to hold Tyr's hand in place. The gods moved quickly, wrapping Gleipnir around the wolf's massive body. Fenrir growled and thrashed, but the ribbon held fast, tightening with every struggle. It was as if the very air had turned against him, binding him tighter with every breath he took. Realizing the trap, Fenrir's rage exploded. His growls turned to deafening roars, shaking the ground and echoing across the skies. He lunged, twisting and pulling, but the magic held firm. The gods watched in awe and terror as the wolf's strength met its match for the first time. Then came the moment they all dreaded. Fenrir's gaze snapped to Tyr, the betrayal in his eyes burning hotter than his fury. With a roar of vengeance, the wolf bit down, severing Tyr's hand in a single, merciless snap. Tyr staggered back, his face pale but unwavering. Blood poured from the wound, staining the earth at his feet, but he did not cry out. His sacrifice had bought them the victory they so desperately needed. Fenrir was bound, his strength contained, for now. The gods cheered, their relief spilling out in joyous cries, but Tyr stood apart from them. He cradled the stump of his arm, his expression unreadable. His sacrifice was not for their praise. It was for something greater, something he alone understood. Fenrir snarled and snapped at the air, his body straining against the unyielding bonds. His voice was filled with venom as he spat at the gods. Cowards! Liars! This will not hold me forever. When I break free, I will bring ruin to all of you. Remember that. The gods turned away, their triumph already casting shadows of fear. But Tyr stayed, his eyes fixed on Fenrir. He did not flinch from the wolf's fury, nor did he offer words of comfort. He simply stood there, his presence a reminder of the price paid to keep the peace. The pain in Tyr's arm was sharp, unrelenting, but it was nothing compared to the weight in his heart. He knew what his sacrifice meant. He knew the binding of Fenrir was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. The wolf's prophecy would come true one day, and Ragnarok would descend upon them all. Tyr's hand was not just a price, it was a promise, a reminder that even the gods were not immune to fate. As the gods prepared to leave, Tyr lingered. He looked at Fenrir, at the creature bound by both chains and betrayal. There was no gloating in Tyr's eyes, no triumph. Only a quiet sorrow, as if he understood the wolf's rage in a way no one else could. Fenrir was not just a beast, he was a force of nature, wild and unyielding. To bind him was to deny his very essence, and Tyr knew the cost of that denial. Fenrir's roars faded into low, guttural growls, his strength spent, for now. But his eyes never left Tyr, their hatred burning brighter than ever. "You will regret this," the wolf said, his voice a chilling whisper. "You more than anyone." Tyr did not respond. He turned and walked away, the weight of his sacrifice pressing down on him like a mountain. Each step was heavy, but he did not falter. He had made his choice, and he would bear its burden for eternity. The wind howled across the barren plains as Odin approached the edge of the world. The air felt different here, heavier, almost alive with an ancient presence. Before him stood Mimir's well, its waters as still as glass, but brimming with unfathomable power. It was said that within this well lay the knowledge of all things, the secrets of the cosmos, the whispers of the past, and the shadowed promises of the future. But such knowledge was not freely given. Mimir emerged from the shadows, his eyes sharp and unyielding. He was no ordinary keeper, his wisdom radiated like an unseen force, his gaze piercing through flesh and spirit alike. He stood there, waiting, as if he had foreseen Odin's arrival long before the All-Father had taken the first step on this path. "What do you seek?" Mimir's voice was deep, resonant, and carried a weight that made the air tremble. "I seek wisdom," Odin replied, his voice steady but tinged with something raw, desperation. "I will do whatever it takes." Mimir studied him, his expression unreadable. "Whatever it takes," he repeated slowly, as though tasting the words. "Do you know the cost of such a wish?" "Knowledge demands sacrifice, Odin." "What are you willing to give?" Odin hesitated, his resolve tested in that single moment. But then he thought of Asgard, his people, and the battles yet to come. The gods would not survive without the wisdom to guide them. His purpose burned brighter than his fear. "Anything," he said, his voice firm now, echoing across the silent expanse. Mimir's lips curved into a somber smile, one that held no joy. "Then give me your eye." The words fell like a thunderclap. Odin's heart skipped, but he did not flinch. He had expected the price to be steep, but this? His eye was not just a piece of him, it was his sight, his vision, his ability to perceive the world fully. To lose it was to walk into darkness, a sacrifice that would haunt him for eternity. But Odin nodded. Without ceremony, Mimir produced a blade, its edge gleaming unnaturally in the faint light. Odin knelt by the well, gripping its cold edge as though it could anchor him against the storm inside. Mimir's movements were precise, and when the blade bit into flesh, the pain was unlike anything Odin had ever endured. It was not just physical, it tore through his soul, leaving a scar far deeper than the wound. Blood spilled into the well, mingling with its waters. The reflection staring back at Odin was no longer whole. One eye remained, fierce and determined, while the other was an empty void, a testament to his sacrifice. Mimir dipped his hand into the well and offered Odin its waters. "Drink," he commanded. Odin brought the water to his lips, and the world shifted. His mind exploded with visions, stars collapsing into black holes, ancient wars that shook the foundations of existence, and shadows of events yet to come. He saw his own death, violent and inevitable, but he did not look away. He saw the end of everything he loved, the betrayal of those he trusted, and the endless cycle of creation and destruction. It was overwhelming, like a tidal wave crashing over him again and again. The weight of the knowledge threatened to crush him, but he held on, his grip tightening as though he could wrestle the truth itself into submission. When it was over, Odin staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. The pain in his missing eye was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. He had gained what he sought, but it came with a burden he would carry for all time. He looked at Mimir, whose expression held neither pity nor pride. "You have what you wanted," Mimir said. "But do not forget, you paid for more than wisdom. You paid for understanding, and that is the heaviest price of all." Odin did not answer. His thoughts were already consumed by the knowledge swirling in his mind. He understood now, understood the fragility of their existence, the inevitability of chaos, and the small, flickering hope that remained. The Allfather turned and began the long walk back to Asgard. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him. His missing eye ached as if it could still see the horrors he had witnessed. But he carried on, for he knew this was his purpose. He was not just a god, he was a protector, a leader, and now a bearer of truths that would shape the fate of all things. And though the cost was great, he would pay it again and again, for the sake of his people. The well faded into the distance, but its presence lingered, a silent reminder of the price of wisdom. The sky burned crimson as the world trembled under the weight of an ancient, unstoppable force. Far above the chaos of the earth, two great wolves raced across the heavens, their eyes glowing with a savage hunger that pierced even the brightest daylight. Skoll and Hati, the hunters of the cosmos, had waited for this moment since time began. Their fates were written in the stars, etched into the very fabric of existence. Skoll, the wolf of shadows, pursued the sun with relentless determination, his snarls echoing through the skies like distant thunder. His massive paws struck the firmament with unyielding fury, each step shaking the balance of the world. The sun fought to outrun him, its golden light flickering like a candle caught in a storm. Yet it could not escape the beast that had been destined to devour it. Beside him ran Hati, his twin, whose icy breath chilled the heavens as he chased the pale moon. Hati's howl pierced the night like a blade, a cry that sent shivers through the hearts of gods and mortals alike. The moon's silver light wavered under his relentless pursuit, as if it too understood that its end was near. The wolves were not born of ordinary blood. They carried within them the chaos of their sire, Fenrir, the great wolf whose name was whispered with dread. From their first breath, they had known no other purpose but to hunt, no other desire but to consume. Day after day, year after year, they ran their eternal race, each moment bringing them closer to the cataclysm they heralded. As their prey faltered, the wolves' snarls grew louder, their fangs glinting with anticipation. The sun's warmth faded, its light dimming under Skoll's shadow. The moon, pale and trembling, seemed to shrink before Hati's relentless pursuit. The balance of the cosmos hung by a thread, and the thread was fraying fast. Far below, the gods of Asgard looked to the sky with grim faces. They knew what was coming. Ragnarok, the end of all things, was upon them. The wolves were more than hunters, they were the harbingers of destruction, their victory the signal for the final battle to begin. The sky darkened further as the wolves closed in, their howls merging into a single, unearthly chorus. It was a sound that could stop hearts, a sound that carried with it the weight of inevitability. For the sun and moon, there was no escape, no sanctuary. Skoll's jaws snapped closer to the sun, the golden orb trembling in its last moments. Hati's breath frosted over the moon, its glow flickering like a dying ember. And then, with a final, triumphant leap, the wolves struck. Skoll's jaws clamped down on the sun, extinguishing its light in an explosion of fire and shadow. The heavens erupted in a blinding flash, the air heavy with the scent of scorched earth. At the same moment, Hati's fangs pierced the moon, its silvery light shattering into 1,000 shards that rained down upon the earth like ghostly tears. Darkness descended, complete and suffocating. The world stood still, as if holding its breath. Skoll and Hati howled, their voices echoing across the void they had created. It was a sound of victory, but also of finality. The eternal chase was over, and with it, the fragile balance of the cosmos had been shattered. But the wolves did not stop. Their hunger was insatiable, their purpose unending. They turned their gaze to the earth below, where the armies of gods and giants were gathering for the ultimate confrontation. The ground shook beneath their massive forms as they descended from the heavens, their eyes burning with the light of their triumph. The gods of Asgard stood ready, their weapons gleaming in the darkness. Odin, his spear Gungnir in hand, stared at the advancing wolves with unflinching resolve. Thor tightened his grip on Mjolnir, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to unleash its fury. Even Loki, the trickster, seemed subdued, his sly grin replaced by a grim determination. The wolves charged, their massive forms a blur of muscle and fury. The ground split beneath their paws, the air itself seeming to bend around them. The gods met them head-on, their weapons clashing against the wolves' unyielding forms. Sparks flew as steel met fawn, the clash of forces shaking the earth to its core. Yet for all their might, the gods knew they could not truly defeat Skoll and Hati. These were not ordinary beasts, they were forces of nature, unstoppable and eternal. Every strike, every blow, seemed only to fuel their rage, their howls growing louder with each passing moment. The battle raged on, each side giving everything they had. The gods fought with the desperation of those who knew they were fighting for more than their lives. They were fighting for the world itself, for the hope that something might endure beyond the darkness. But as the wolves pressed forward, their fangs snapping at the throats of gods, a terrible truth became clear. Ragnarok was not a battle that could be won. It was a reckoning, a cleansing of the old to make way for the new. And Skoll and Hati, with their unrelenting hunger, were the harbingers of that change. Their howls echoed long after the battle ended, a haunting reminder of the cost of balance. And as the world burned around them, the wolves disappeared into the shadows, their task complete. The battlefield was chaos incarnate, a nightmarish landscape of fire, blood, and shattered realms. The air reeked of ash and iron, and the earth beneath was soaked with the lifeblood of gods and monsters. Amid this inferno of destruction, a figure stood tall and unyielding, his silence more piercing than any war cry. Vidar, son of Odin, bore no words of rage or grief, but his every breath carried the weight of a promise, vengeance. The All-Father was gone. The mighty Odin, king of the gods, had fallen beneath the jaws of Fenrir, the monstrous wolf destined to end him. That moment had torn a hole in the fabric of the cosmos, a wound that bled fury and despair. But in the shadow of this loss, Vidar rose, his heart pounding with a purpose that burned brighter than the fires consuming the world. Fenrir loomed in the distance, his massive form eclipsing the battlefield. His blood-soaked jaws still dripped with the essence of Odin, his growls rumbling like distant earthquakes. The wolf reveled in his triumph, his eyes blazing with the savage joy of one who had fulfilled his destined purpose. Yet, even in his ferocity, Fenrir faltered as his gaze met Vidar's. There was something in the sun's silent stare, a stillness more terrifying than rage, a calm that whispered of inevitable retribution. Vidar moved forward, his steps deliberate, the ground trembling beneath his feet. In his hand, he carried no mighty spear or enchanted blade. Instead, his left foot bore the fateful shoe crafted from the scraps of leather gifted by all mortals, a weapon of destiny forged in quiet preparation. It was unassuming, yet its purpose was absolute. It would seal the fate of the beast that had torn his father from the heavens. Fenrir snarled, a sound that sent shivers through the ranks of gods and giants alike. His massive frame shifted, muscles coiling as he prepared to meet this silent avenger. Vidar's expression did not change. He neither quickened his pace nor faltered. Each step was measured, as if the battle itself waited for him to arrive. The clash, when it came, was as sudden as it was brutal. Fenrir lunged, his jaws snapping like thunder, aiming to crush this solitary figure as he had crushed the All-Father. But Vidar was ready. With a speed that defied the wolf's massive size, he drove his foot into Fenrir's lower jaw, pinning it to the ground. The shoe held firm, unyielding against the beast's immense strength, and for the first time, Fenrir's howls carried a note of desperation. Vidar did not hesitate. With his free hand, he reached for the upper jaw of the beast, his grip like iron. The gods and giants who fought around them paused, their eyes drawn to the spectacle of this silent warrior wrestling with the monstrous wolf. Slowly, inexorably, Vidar began to tear Fenrir's jaws apart. The wolf thrashed and roared, his claws raking the earth, but he could not break free. The moment stretched into eternity, the struggle a brutal testament to strength and will. Vidar's muscles burned with the effort, his veins bulging as he poured every ounce of his being into this final act. The world itself seemed to hold its breath as the son of Odin completed his father's unfinished battle. And then, with a sound that echoed like the breaking of the cosmos, Fenrir's jaws snapped open, the great beast torn asunder. His body collapsed, lifeless, to the ground, the light in his fiery eyes extinguished. The battlefield fell silent, save for the crackling of flames and the distant cries of the dying. Vidar stood over the fallen wolf, his chest heaving with exertion. His hands trembled, not with fear or weakness, but with the raw power of what he had accomplished. The grief that had once threatened to consume him was gone, replaced by the solemnity of justice served. His silence spoke volumes, a tribute to the father he had avenged and the world that would forever remember this moment. The skies above remained dark, the fires of Ragnarok still raging. Yet, in the stillness that followed, there was a flicker of something more, a faint glimmer of hope that even in the face of ultimate destruction, courage and resolve could prevail. Vidar, son of Odin, stood as a testament to that truth, his presence a reminder that even in the darkest hour, the light of justice could never be extinguished. The storm raged like an unrelenting god, its winds howling as if the skies themselves were screaming in defiance. Thunder cracked, splitting the heavens, and the ground trembled under the weight of something ancient stirring. In the chaos of the apocalypse, two forces stood poised to clash, Thor, the god of thunder, and Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, whose very body encircled the world. Thor's grip tightened around Mjolnir, the hammer that had felled giants and shattered mountains. His eyes burned with an unyielding determination, his breath steady despite the madness surrounding him. He had faced many foes, but none like this. Jormungandr was no mere beast, it was a living calamity, its scales shimmering like liquid night and its eyes glowing with malice older than the stars. The serpent rose from the churning sea, its monstrous form dwarfing even the mountains. Waves crashed against its coils, and the world seemed to shrink beneath its terrible presence. It hissed, the sound like 1,000 swords scraping against stone, and the very air grew heavy with venomous intent. Thor didn't flinch. He couldn't. The stakes were too high, and the weight of the end times rested on his shoulders. With a roar that shook the skies, Thor charged. Lightning erupted from Mjolnir, illuminating the battlefield in blinding flashes. The serpent struck, its massive jaws snapping toward him with the speed of a viper. Thor leaped, narrowly avoiding the attack, and brought his hammer down with all his might. The blow landed against Jormungandr's head, the crack reverberating like the very earth was splitting apart. The serpent recoiled, its cry a deafening wail that made even the gods falter. But it wasn't defeated. Not yet. It lunged again, its coils thrashing with enough force to topple trees and shatter rocks. Thor was thrown back, his armor dented, his body bruised. Blood trickled down his brow, but he rose, his resolve unbroken. Each strike of Mjolnir sent shockwaves through the battlefield, but Jormungandr fought with equal ferocity. Its venom sprayed through the air, sizzling as it touched the ground, leaving charred craters in its wake. Thor dodged and countered, his hammer a blur of deadly precision. Yet, for every blow he landed, the serpent seemed to grow more enraged, its attacks more ferocious. Time felt meaningless as the two titans clashed. The storm around them intensified, the winds carrying the cries of gods and mortals alike. Thor's arms ached, his breaths came in ragged gasps, but he refused to fall. Every fiber of his being screamed in protest, yet he fought on, knowing that defeat was not an option. Jormungandr struck again, its tail sweeping through the air like a battering ram. Thor was thrown to the ground, his hammer slipping from his grasp. The serpent loomed over him, its fangs dripping with venom that promised a death as agonizing as it was certain. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. But Thor was not done. With a roar that echoed across the 9 realms, he reached for Mjolnir, its familiar weight grounding him. Lightning coursed through his veins as he rose once more, defiant in the face of destruction. He swung the hammer with every ounce of strength he had left, striking Jormungandr with a blow so powerful it shattered the serpent's jaw. The beast writhed in agony, its massive body convulsing as the life began to drain from its glowing eyes. Thor stood over it, battered but unyielding, his breath ragged and his body trembling. The serpent lashed out one final time, its venomous fangs sinking into Thor's side. The pain was excruciating, a burning that spread like wildfire through his veins. Thor staggered, his legs threatening to give way. But even as the venom coursed through his body, he stood tall, his hammer still clenched in his hand. Jormungandr's movements slowed, its great coils collapsing in a lifeless heap. The Thunder God had won, but at a cost that would soon claim him. As the storm began to fade, Thor remained standing, his silhouette framed by the smoldering ruins of the world. His victory was undeniable, but his fate was sealed. The venom's grip tightened, and he fell to his knees, his hammer slipping from his grasp for the last time. The skies wept, the rain mingling with the blood-soaked earth as the gods bore witness to the end of their mightiest warrior. Thor's eyes closed, his final breath a whisper lost in the wind. He had faced the serpent, the harbinger of doom, and triumphed. But in doing so, he had given everything he had, and the world would remember his sacrifice for eternity. The battlefield lay in chaos, shrouded by smoke and the cries of the dying. The ground trembled beneath the weight of a battle too great for any one world to contain. In the heart of this destruction, Odin, the All-Father, stood firm. His one eye burned with determination, and his spear, Gungnir, gleamed with an unearthly glow. Across from him, Fenrir emerged, a monstrous wolf whose very presence made the air grow heavy, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Fenrir's eyes, burning like twin suns, locked onto Odin. There was no hesitation, no mercy in that gaze, only hunger. His massive form towered over the battlefield, each step shaking the ground. The wolf's maw dripped with anticipation, his fangs glinting like daggers in the dim light of the dying sun. He was no ordinary beast, he was the embodiment of chaos and vengeance, a force of nature that could not be tamed. Odin gripped Gungnir tighter, his knuckles white. He had prepared for this moment, though nothing could truly prepare anyone for the reality of standing before Fenrir. This was not a battle for glory or honor. It was a battle for survival, a desperate attempt to hold back the end of everything. Fenrir lunged without warning, his massive jaws snapping shut inches from Odin. The Allfather dodged with a speed that belied his age, spinning to strike with Gungnir. The spear cut through the air like lightning, aimed straight for the wolf's heart. But Fenrir was too fast, his body twisting away from the blow with a grace that defied his size. The two clashed again and again, the sound of their battle drowning out even the cries of the dying around them. Each strike of Gungnir sent shockwaves across the battlefield, but Fenrir was relentless, his attacks brutal and unyielding. He struck with claws that could tear through mountains, his snarls echoing like thunder. Odin countered with precision, every movement a testament to his centuries of wisdom and skill. But this was not a battle of equals. Fenrir was raw power, a force that no amount of strategy could fully contain. Odin knew this. He felt it in the way his strikes seemed to glance off the wolf's thick hide, and the way each blow he took left him weaker than the last. Blood trickled from a gash on his side, staining the earth beneath him. Still, he fought on. There was a moment, a fleeting heartbeat, when Odin locked eyes with Fenrir, and time seemed to stand still. In the wolf's gaze, he saw more than fury. He saw the inevitability of what was to come. This was Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, and no amount of strength or cunning could change that. Yet Odin did not falter. He raised Gungnir once more, his voice a roar that carried across the battlefield. For Asgard, he cried, his words filled with all the defiance he could muster. Fenrir answered with a deafening howl that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality. He charged, his massive jaws open wide, ready to consume the Allfather. Odin met him head-on, driving Gungnir forward with every ounce of strength he had left. The spear struck true, piercing Fenrir's chest. The wolf let out a howl of pain, his massive form shuddering under the force of the blow. But Fenrir was not defeated. With a final, ferocious effort, he snapped his jaws shut around Odin. The Allfather's cry was cut short as the wolf's fangs closed, his body consumed by the beast. The battlefield fell silent, as if even the gods themselves were stunned by what they had witnessed. Fenrir stood tall, bloodied but victorious, his howl of triumph echoing across the desolation. Yet, even in death, Odin's spirit seemed to linger, a reminder that this battle was not fought in vain. It was a sacrifice, a defiant stand against the inevitable, a testament to the resilience of those who fight, even when all seems lost. The battlefield was silent but far from peaceful. The sky was a bleak gray, its light smothered by ash and smoke from the fires that had consumed everything. The air was heavy, not with anticipation, but with the weight of lives already lost. Among the ruins, the sons of Thor stood, their faces etched with grief and determination. They bore their father's legacy not as a shield, but as a spear aimed directly at the heart of evil. Magni and Modi, the two children of the thunder god, were not mere reflections of their father. They carried his strength in their veins, but their hearts burned with their own unrelenting fire. They had lost too much: family, friends, and the world they once knew. Yet even in the shadow of Ragnarok's devastation, they refused to kneel. There was still one battle left to fight, one enemy left to face. Magni gripped Mjolnir, the mighty hammer of Thor, now passed down to him. It felt strange in his hands, a weight heavier than he had imagined, not because of its size, but because of what it symbolized. He looked at Modi, whose fierce eyes burned like embers beneath a storm. Modi's sword gleamed, its edge sharp enough to cut through the darkness itself. "They're coming," Modi said, his voice low but steady. Magni nodded, his grip tightening. He could feel the vibrations in the earth, the telltale signs of their enemy's approach. The forces of evil were relentless, an army of shadows and beasts that seemed to rise endlessly from the carnage of Ragnarok. Among them were creatures more horrifying than words could capture, serpentine monsters with eyes like molten fire, giants whose roars cracked the sky, and beings whose twisted forms defied logic. When the first wave hit, it was like the fury of a storm unleashed. Magni raised Mjolnir, and with a roar that could shake mountains, he swung the hammer. Lightning erupted from its head, scorching the earth and tearing through the ranks of their foes. Modi moved like a shadow, his sword flashing as he cut down anything in his path. They fought side by side, a perfect balance of force and precision. For every enemy they struck down, it felt as if 10 more appeared. The ground was soon slick with blood, the cries of the dying mingling with the clash of steel and the roar of thunder. Yet the sons of Thor pressed on, their movements a blur of power and rage. They were not fighting for glory or survival, they were fighting for revenge. In the midst of the chaos, a figure emerged, a towering giant with eyes like burning coals and a laugh that echoed like an earthquake. This was no ordinary foe. This was the leader of the enemy forces, a creature of unimaginable strength and malice. He strode toward Magni and Modi, his massive weapon leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. "So these are the sons of Thor," the giant rumbled, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can stand where your father fell?" Magni didn't respond with words. He hurled Mjolnir with all his might, the hammer hurtling toward the giant with the speed of a lightning bolt. But the giant caught it mid-air, his massive hand closing around it as if it were nothing more than a toy. He laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made the ground tremble. "Pathetic," he sneered, hurling the hammer back at Magni. The force of the throw knocked Magni to the ground, the impact leaving a crater in the earth. "Magni!" Modi shouted, rushing to his brother's side. But the giant was already upon them, his weapon descending like a falling star. Modi raised his sword to block, the clash sending shockwaves that rippled across the battlefield. The fight that followed was brutal. The giant was faster and stronger than anything they had faced before, his strikes relentless and devastating. But Magni and Modi were more than warriors, they were Thor's legacy. They fought with a ferocity born of loss and a determination that could not be broken. As the battle raged on, the tide began to turn. Magni recovered Mjolnir, the hammer crackling with renewed energy in his hands. Modi's strikes grew sharper, his movements more precise. Together, they pushed the giant back, their combined strength a force that even he could not withstand. In a final, desperate move, the giant raised his weapon, preparing to unleash a blow that would end it all. But Magni was faster. With a roar that shook the heavens, he brought Mjolnir down on the giant's head. The impact was deafening, a flash of light so bright it blinded everyone around. When the dust settled, the giant lay dead, his massive form crumpled like a fallen mountain. The battlefield grew quiet once more, the silence broken only by the ragged breathing of the brothers. They stood amidst the carnage, bloodied but unbroken. The forces of evil had been vanquished, but the cost had been high. Magni and Modi knew that this was not the end. Their father's legacy demanded more of them, and they would not rest until every last trace of the darkness had been eradicated. For now, though, they allowed themselves a moment to grieve. They had won this battle, but the pain of their loss still lingered, a wound that no victory could heal. Yet in their hearts, a spark of hope remained, a belief that even in the face of Ragnarok's devastation, there was still a chance for something new to rise from the ashes. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the fire giants marched forward, their bodies glowing with molten rage. Surt, their leader, stood at the forefront, towering like a mountain of flame. His eyes blazed with fury, his sword, made of the very fires of the sun, crackling with an intensity that could scorch the earth. The air was thick with heat, and every step they took sent waves of fire spiraling into the sky, a harbinger of the end. The moment they arrived, it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath, awaiting the inevitable destruction. And it was not just the land that trembled, it was the great Yggdrasil itself, the mighty world tree, whose roots touched every corner of existence. The fire giants had come for one thing, to burn it all down. Yggdrasil, the center of all worlds, the eternal tree that stood as a bridge between the gods, men, and every realm in between, was under siege. Its branches, which had once held the stars, the hopes of the gods, and the destinies of all living creatures, were now withering, as though the life itself was being drained from them. The great tree, symbol of everything that held the world together, was beginning to fall. Surt raised his sword high, the flames casting long, ominous shadows across the land. His voice, a roar that shook the heavens, echoed through the vastness. "This world is ours to burn," he bellowed, his words igniting the hearts of his kin. The fire giants surged forward, their burning hands reaching toward Yggdrasil's mighty roots. With each strike, the world seemed to crack, and every flame that touched the ancient tree sent a tremor through the hearts of those who still fought for the world. The gods, weakened from the battle against the monstrous creatures of Ragnarok, could only watch as the once immovable tree bent under the power of Surt's rage. Thor, already bruised and battle-worn, staggered toward the tree, his eyes filled with sorrow. He had fought for so long, had seen the deaths of so many, but nothing could have prepared him for this. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the importance of Yggdrasil. This was not just the destruction of a tree, it was the unraveling of everything. Beside him, Loki, ever the schemer, stood silent, his face a mask of something between fury and regret. He had always played the game of the gods with a wicked smile, but today, there was no joy in his eyes. The fire giant's assault was beyond any mischief or trickery. It was a battle for survival, not only of the gods, but of the very essence of existence. As Surt's sword cleaved through the branches of Yggdrasil, a terrible groan echoed from deep within the roots. The world felt as though it was being ripped apart. The once immense power that had surged through the tree now waned, like a dying ember. Its leaves fell like ash, and the mighty trunk began to splinter, sending waves of sorrow across the 9 realms. The sky itself seemed to darken, as though the sun no longer had the strength to rise. The fire giants moved relentlessly, their flaming weapons hacking away at the tree's sacred heart. The gods, weakened and broken, could do little but watch in horror. The cycle of creation that had always been tied to Yggdrasil was beginning to end. Suddenly, with a deafening crack, the heart of Yggdrasil shattered, sending a wave of power that turned the sky red. For a moment, there was silence. Then the earth groaned, as if even it could feel the weight of what had happened. The great tree, the center of all life, fell with a sound like the end of the world. As the flames of search giants rose higher, consuming the tree's remains, a terrible cry echoed from the heavens. It was not the cry of a single god, but of the world itself, mourning the loss of the very thing that held it together. Magni and Modi, standing at the edge of the battlefield, were the first to feel the shift. The winds no longer carried the scent of life. Instead, they were thick with ash and smoke. They looked toward their father's hammer, now lying on the ground, its power fading as the tree that once anchored the gods began to crumble into dust. The sons of Thor knew, in that moment, that the world would never be the same. Even the gods, those immortal beings who had once stood above all else, were powerless against this force. The fire giants had done what no one had dared to imagine, torn down the world tree itself, the source of all existence. Surge stood above the ashes of Yggdrasil, his sword held high, his chest heaving with triumphant rage. The fire around him burned hotter, the flames spreading as though they were a reflection of his own heart. His warriors gathered behind him, their monstrous forms casting long shadows across the broken land. They had done what no one had believed possible, they had brought the world to its knees. But even in the midst of their victory, something felt off. The destruction was complete, but the fire giants stood on the brink of a world without meaning, without purpose. Their triumph had come at a cost far greater than they realized. As the flames continued to consume Yggdrasil's remnants, the land grew still, its pulse growing faint. The battle for the world tree had been won, but the true cost of that victory would unfold in the silence that followed. The fires that had burned so brightly now flickered, unsure of what to consume next. The fire giants had destroyed the source of all life, but in doing so, they had unleashed a grief that would linger in every corner of the 9 realms. The world was broken, its heart lost, and no amount of fire could restore what had been torn asunder. The ashes of Yggdrasil swirled in the wind, a reminder of all that had been lost, and yet a sign that even in destruction, there would be something new, something unknown, waiting to emerge from the ruins. But for now, the world mourned the death of its heart. And in the fire giant's victory, the flames that burned brightest would soon begin to die. The air was heavy with stillness, as though the world itself had been holding its breath for an eternity. The once broken lands, scorched and shattered by the fury of battle, now lay quiet, an eerie calm settling where chaos had once reigned. And in the midst of this quiet, a flicker of light pierced the darkness, small at first, but growing brighter with each passing moment. It began with the softest whispers, as though the wind itself had started to speak again, carrying the voices of those who had once fallen. The heroes of Asgard, those brave souls who had given everything in the fight against the forces of darkness, were returning. The very earth seemed to awaken beneath their feet, as though it recognized them, and was eager to rise with them. Thor, his beard thick with the marks of battle, stood at the forefront. He had walked through fire and storm, had faced death more times than he could count, yet here he was, alive. The weight of his hammer, Mjolnir, felt light in his hands as he looked toward the horizon, where the first rays of a new sun broke through the clouds, casting gold across the land. There was no joy in his eyes, only a quiet reverence for the fact that life, against all odds, had returned. Beside him, his sons, Magni and Modi, were no longer the children they once were. They had grown, their faces marked by the battles they had fought, their hearts heavier from the weight of the world. They had seen their father fall, they had fought for their lives in the shadow of destruction, and now they stood with him once more. But it was not just a reunion, it was a rebirth, a moment of transformation that would carry them all into the future. And then, through the mists of the broken lands, came the others. Freya, her golden hair now flowing like a river of sunlight, walked with quiet grace, her heart heavy but full of hope. She had seen the worst of what had been, but she had never stopped believing in the possibility of what could be. Her hands, once bound by grief, were now reaching forward, ready to shape the new world that was coming. In the distance, a figure emerged from the shadows, Loki. The trickster, the mischief maker, the one who had caused so much pain and suffering, yet whose heart still carried the spark of life. His steps were slow, measured, as though he, too, was contemplating what it meant to return, what it meant to begin again. There was a quiet peace in the air now, but it was not the peace of a world that had forgotten the pain of the past. No, this peace was hard-earned, forged through the fire of destruction and rebirth. It was the peace that only those who had faced the very edge of death could understand. The gods, having fought through Ragnarok, had emerged from the ashes, not as they once were, but as something new. Their bodies were scarred, but their spirits were stronger than ever before. The first to step forward was Baldr, the god of light, who had been lost to the darkness. His return was nothing short of miraculous. His eyes, once clouded by death, now shone with the brightness of 1,000 suns. The darkness that had once taken him now seemed to recede, as though it had never existed. His very presence was a reminder that no matter how deep the sorrow, there was always a way back to the light. As they gathered, the gods felt the weight of the land's wounds beneath their feet, but there was no fear, no hesitation. They had seen the end of the world, and yet here they were, standing in the beginning of something new. Asgard was no longer a place of perfection, it was a place of understanding. The gods, with all their power and wisdom, now saw the value in imperfection, in the brokenness that made them whole. The rebuilding began quietly, as if the very earth was taking a moment to remember what it had lost. But in time, the rivers flowed again, the trees began to sprout new leaves, and the skies, once darkened by the smoke of war, brightened with the promise of hope. The realms, which had been shattered, slowly began to heal, piece by piece. The gods walked through the land, their hands brushing against the earth as they whispered quiet words of comfort. But even as the world began to take shape again, there was something else growing within the hearts of the gods. A hunger, not for power, not for control, but for connection. They had fought alone for so long, had carried the weight of their duties and their destinies. But now, after Ragnarok, they saw the importance of togetherness. As they rebuilt the realms, they also rebuilt themselves, learning not just to lead, but to listen. In the distance, the great tree of Yggdrasil began to rise once more, its roots stretching deep into the earth, its branches reaching high into the sky. It was not the same as it once had been, but it was strong, and it was alive. The gods had come back to it, not to claim it, but to nurture it, to make sure it grew into something that could hold the world together again. It was the symbol of their rebirth, their own growth, from the ashes of the past, into something new. And as the gods worked together, the heroes of Asgard began to realize that the true battle was not against their enemies, but against the brokenness they carried within themselves. The pain, the loss, the grief, they had all been a part of them, but now they had the chance to choose something different. And so, with every stone they laid, with every word of encouragement, they healed, not just the world, but themselves. In the silence that followed, as the gods stood together in the center of the new world they were creating, they knew that Ragnarok had not been the end. It had been the beginning. And though they had lost so much, they now had something even more precious, each other, and the chance to rebuild everything they had lost. The heroes had returned, but this time, they were not the same. They were something more. And the world, in all its brokenness, was beginning to heal. The land was quiet now. The thunder had faded, and the skies, once full of fire and fury, were clear once more. The battle that had ravaged the realms was over, but in its wake, everything had changed. The gods, those mighty beings who had fought and fallen, had risen again. They were not the same. The old world was gone, torn apart by blood and rage, but in its place, a new world began to take shape, fragile and raw, but full of promise. The earth, though scarred, was healing. Where the once proud trees had fallen, new shoots broke through the soil. The rivers, which had run red with the blood of gods and giants, now flowed clean again, sparkling in the soft light of a new dawn. The world had been reborn, just as the gods had been. It was a quiet rebirth, the kind that comes after the storm, when the dust settles and only the strong remain. Thor stood on the edge of the field, his hammer in hand, looking out over the land he had fought to save. He had seen it all, the death of his brothers, the fall of his father, the end of everything. And yet here he was, alive, watching the world take its first breaths after the storm. He could feel the weight of the world in his bones, the responsibility that came with being a god. But now, more than ever, he understood that power was not enough. Strength was not enough. There was something else that would shape the new world: understanding, unity, and compassion. Beside him, his sons, Magni and Modi, stood silently. They had fought with their father, had seen the world fall apart around them, and had felt the sting of loss. But they, too, understood. They had seen the suffering and the sacrifice, and they knew now that the future would not be built on the ashes of the past. It would be built on the lessons learned from it. Their strength was no longer just in their bodies, but in their hearts. Freya, the goddess of love and beauty, walked with them, her golden hair flowing gently in the wind. Her eyes, once filled with the sorrow of loss, now sparkled with a quiet hope. She had seen her family fall apart, had watched as the world crumbled around her. But in this new world, there was something different. Love had not been destroyed in Ragnarok, it had been tempered by fire. And now, in the ruins, she saw the possibility of something more. A love that could heal. A love that could rebuild. The sky overhead was no longer the oppressive gray it had once been. The sun shone brightly, casting warm golden light on the broken landscape. The heavens, too, were changing. The gods, once separated by their pride and power, now stood together, united in a way they had never been before. Their battles had shaped them, their losses had humbled them, and their survival had brought them closer. There was no longer a world of gods and mortals. There was only the world, and the need to rebuild it. Baldur, the god of light, had returned. He had once been lost, swallowed by darkness, but now he stood in the light again. His presence was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way back to the light. His smile was soft, but his eyes carried the weight of everything he had endured. He understood now, more than ever, the fragile nature of life, and he was determined to protect it. The love and light that he had always carried within him would be the foundation of the new world. And Loki, the trickster god, the one who had brought so much chaos, who had turned the world upside down, was also there. His return was not without complexity. The gods knew his role in the past, the games he had played, the betrayals he had caused. But even he, broken and scarred, was part of this new beginning. There was no more room for old grudges. The world had been destroyed, and now they had a chance to start over. His smile, wry and full of mystery, was softer now, less mocking. He, too, had learned the price of destruction. Yggdrasil, the great tree that connected all the worlds, had survived. Its roots had been torn and scorched, but it had not been destroyed. It stood at the center of everything, a symbol of life and death, of growth and decay. The gods, with their hands held out to it, began to repair the broken branches. It was not a quick task, nothing in this new world was easy. But it was possible. The tree, like the gods, was healing. It was growing, and with it, the hope for a future. And in the far distance, across the broken lands, the first signs of new life appeared. The humans, the mortals who had survived Ragnarok, were rebuilding as well. They, too, had seen the horrors of the old world, but they had also seen the beauty of its creation. There was no turning back, but there was forward. The gods, once so distant and separate, had now become a part of the world again, walking alongside mortals, learning from them, teaching them. In the quiet moments, as the gods stood together and watched the world begin to heal, there was an understanding that never existed before. Power was no longer about domination. Strength was no longer about might. The gods had learned, through pain and loss, that the world could not be rebuilt by force alone. It had to be rebuilt with compassion, with understanding, with the recognition that even the smallest act of kindness could change everything. The land was still raw, still broken in places, but it was alive. And as the gods walked through it, they knew that they would continue to shape it, to rebuild it, not with the strength of their weapons, but with the strength of their hearts. In the ashes of the old world, they had found something new, a chance to make things right. A chance to build a world that would last, not just for them, but for everyone. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land, but the light still shone, soft and golden, painting the world in hues of hope. The battle had been fought, the war had been won, but the real work was only just beginning. The new world was waiting, fragile and uncertain, but full of promise. And as the gods stood together, looking out over the land, they knew one thing for sure: the future was theirs to create. The skies were still heavy, the scent of burnt earth lingering in the air, a reminder of what had passed. The Valkyries, the fierce, immortal warriors, stood on the edge of the battlefield, their armor glinting like shards of a broken star. Ragnarok had come, and in its wake, they had watched the gods fall, their noble steeds scattered in the chaos, their blades too heavy to lift in a world that had lost its way. But for the Valkyries, death was not an end, it was a beginning. They had seen the end of the gods, the fall of their beloved Asgard, but they knew that their role was far from over. They had lived through battles, through countless lifetimes of war, but now, in the quiet aftermath, their task was different. Their final journey would not be one of battle, but of legacy. The Valkyries had always been the choosers of the slain, guiding the souls of fallen heroes to the halls of Valhalla. They were the embodiment of fate, of battle's cruel inevitability, and yet now, they stood at the edge of the world, their mission unclear. They could no longer serve the gods, their loyalty was no longer needed by the ones who had fallen in the war. And yet, they could not leave the world in ruins. They had always been the keepers of hope, the carriers of valor, and in this silence, they found themselves once more with a duty to guide the next generation of heroes. As the Valkyries gathered in the twilight, their eyes fixed on the horizon, they knew their path was not just one of wandering, but of teaching. They were no longer bound to the halls of the gods, but to the earth itself. It was a different kind of battle they would face now, one where the warriors they chose were not the ones who could wield swords and shields, but those whose hearts beat with courage. They would need to inspire, to teach, to show what true heroism was. One by one, the Valkyries took to the sky, their wings sweeping through the air like storms of their own making. The land below seemed so small, but to them, every inch was precious. They flew over broken towns and crumbled cities, places where the echoes of the fallen still lingered in the wind. It was in these places that they would find the ones worthy of their guidance. They would find the children who had witnessed the horrors of war, the ones who had seen their parents fall, their homes burn. These children, these survivors, were the new warriors of the world, and they would carry the weight of a shattered world on their shoulders. But the Valkyries were not just looking for warriors, they were looking for hope. In the ashes of the old world, they searched for sparks of light that would lead the next generation forward. They saw the fire in the eyes of a young girl who had lost her family but still carried the hope of a better tomorrow. They saw the strength in the heart of a boy who had been born into a world of violence, yet refused to succumb to its call. The Valkyries knew that this was their last mission, not to lead these heroes into battle, but to help them find the strength within themselves. They flew from village to village, across the fractured land, their presence like a whisper of the past. They would appear on the edges of towns, watching, waiting, seeing who would rise from the ashes. The world may have been broken, but it had not been destroyed. It had merely been waiting for the right moment to heal. In one quiet village, the Valkyries found a boy named Eirik. He was not like the great warriors of old. He had never fought a battle, never swung a sword. But when the Valkyries saw the way he cared for the sick and the wounded, the way he helped rebuild his home, they knew he was a hero. He was a hero not because he had fought in the war, but because he had chosen to heal the wounds that the war had left behind. The Valkyries watched him, silently, as if waiting for him to notice their presence. When he finally looked up, his eyes filled with wonder and fear. He had seen them before in his dreams, tall, strong, and graceful, like angels of war. But these Valkyries were different. They had no need for war anymore. Eirik did not speak to them at first, unsure of what he was seeing, unsure if he was even worthy of their attention. But one Valkyrie, her wings heavy with the weight of all she had seen, stepped forward. She did not speak, but her eyes spoke louder than any words could. Eirik understood, in that moment, that he had been chosen, not for what he had done, but for what he could do. The Valkyrie placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but strong, and in that simple gesture, he understood. He was a new kind of hero, one who would carry the strength of those who had fallen, not in battle, but in love, in hope, in the desire for a better world. The Valkyries continued their journey, finding others like Eirik, each of them different, yet all of them bound by a common thread, the desire to rebuild, to bring life to a world that had known only death. These children, these future heroes, would be the ones who would carry the world forward. They would not forget the lessons of the past, but they would build a future on the foundations of love, courage, and sacrifice. The Valkyries did not ask for recognition. They did not need praise. They had lived their lives in service to the gods, to the warriors, and to the land. But now, in the twilight of their existence, they had found a new purpose. They would not disappear into the night. They would leave behind a legacy, not of battles fought, but of lives changed. The Valkyries would be the ones who shaped the future, not through the clash of swords, but through the courage to stand for what was right, to protect the weak, to heal the wounded. As the last of the Valkyries disappeared into the horizon, their wings folding against the sky, there was a sense of finality in the air. The world had been left in their care. And in their hearts, the Valkyries knew that the next generation would carry their memory forward. They had given them the tools to rebuild. They had given them hope. And with that, they were gone, their task complete. But the world they had left behind would never forget them. The winds howled through the ruins of the once great halls, carrying with them the whispers of ancient wisdom, the kind that only Odin could impart. The All-Father, now gone, had left behind more than just the shattered remnants of his kingdom. He had left behind a legacy, one that would live on in the hearts of the warriors who had followed him, in the soldiers who had fought and fallen, and in the minds of those who would rise from the ashes of Ragnarok. Odin's wisdom had never been just about the art of battle. It was a deeper understanding of what it meant to be a warrior, not just in the field, but in life itself. He had seen the cost of war, felt its weight on his own soul, and yet he had chosen to walk the path of the warrior. The ravens, the wolves, and the endless search for knowledge had been his way. His wisdom was not a simple call to arms, but a call to know oneself, to understand that victory did not come from strength alone, but from the quiet power of knowing when to fight, when to hold back, and when to sacrifice. Even after the thunder of Ragnarok had faded and the bodies of gods and men had been scattered like fallen leaves, Odin's influence lingered in the air. The warriors who rose from the destruction were not just fighters, they were keepers of his teachings. And they fought not just for glory, but for something deeper, something that transcended mere survival. In the small villages that dotted the land, the old stories of Odin were passed down like treasured heirlooms. Fathers whispered tales of the All-Father's wisdom to their sons, mothers sang of his bravery to their daughters, and around every campfire, warriors swore that they could still feel his presence guiding them, even though he was no longer there in the flesh. The runes of his knowledge were etched into their hearts, passed on from one generation to the next, like a torch being passed across the centuries. Odin had always known that the greatest battles were fought not with swords, but with the mind. His time in the Well of Wisdom had granted him a perspective that few could understand. He knew that war was not about blind rage, but about strategy, patience, and foresight. The warriors who had fought under his banner had learned this well, and now, after the final battle, they carried this knowledge forward. One such warrior was Bjorn, a man who had been but a child when the final days of Ragnarok had arrived. His father had fallen in the war, and his mother had whispered of Odin's wisdom as she tended to the wounded. As Bjorn grew, the stories of Odin's might, his intellect, and his compassion became his guide. He knew that to be a true warrior was not to simply seek out battle, but to understand it, to control it. And as the new world began to form, it was warriors like Bjorn who would rebuild the strength of the North, armed not just with weapons, but with the wisdom Odin had left behind. Bjorn sat at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the sea, the place where so much had been lost, and so much had been gained. His hands, calloused from years of fighting, clenched into fists, not in anger, but in resolve. The world had been broken, but in the quiet, there was a sense that something new was beginning to stir. He could feel Odin's presence, not in a physical sense, but in the calm that washed over him when he allowed himself to listen. The wisdom Odin had shared was now Bjorn's to carry. He knew that it was not enough to simply fight, he had to lead. The old ways of bloodshed and revenge would not heal the wounds of the world. They would only deepen them. Odin had always said that true power was in knowing one's own limitations and understanding that strength could be a tool of healing, not just destruction. Bjorn rose to his feet and placed his hand on the sword at his side, the metal cool and familiar. It had been his father's sword, but now it was his own. With a steady breath, he closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to Odin, not for victory, but for wisdom. He asked for the strength to make the hard choices, the courage to lead not by force, but by the example of honor, compassion, and integrity that Odin had shown throughout his life. As Bjorn traveled the land, he saw how the warriors of this new world had come to embody the wisdom of their fallen gods. They were not like the brutal, mindless warriors of the past. No, these warriors were different. They fought with purpose, with an understanding of the cost of war. They did not rush into battle without thought. They took their time, considered their actions, and when the time came, they fought with a clarity that came from the knowledge that victory was not an end, but a beginning. They knew that true victory came in the preservation of life, not the destruction of it. The teachings of Odin were seen in the way these warriors held their families close, and the way they rebuilt their villages, and in the way they governed their lands. They ruled with wisdom, not cruelty. They did not seek power for the sake of power, they sought it to protect the weak and the vulnerable, just as Odin had done during his reign. The warriors knew that strength was not measured by the number of enemies defeated, but by the strength of one's character. In the great halls, where the fires once roared with the voices of gods, there were now echoes of new leaders, young warriors who carried the legacy of Odin in their hearts. They spoke not just of conquest, but of unity. They were not interested in the glories of war, but in the glories of peace. Their battles were not fought for plunder, but for the preservation of the world that remained. Odin's legacy was eternal. It had been etched into the hearts of the warriors, into the fabric of the world itself. His wisdom had shaped the way the world would rebuild after Ragnarok, and his influence could still be felt in every corner of the new world. The fire of war that had burned so brightly had been extinguished, and now it was replaced with the steady, enduring flame of wisdom and hope. The warriors who had risen from the ashes of Ragnarok were the true heirs of Odin's legacy. They were the ones who would shape the future, not through the power of the sword, but through the wisdom of the mind and the strength of the heart. They were the ones who would carry forward Odin's teachings, ensuring that the world never forgot the true meaning of battle, of war, and of life itself. The battlefield lay silent, the echoes of war fading into the wind. The gods, who had fought so fiercely, now stood at the edge of the world they had once ruled, their bodies weary, their spirits spent. The blood of ancient battles still clung to them, but it was time. The time for their final rest had come. They had given everything, and now they would return home. The sky above was painted with the last hues of twilight, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the land. In the distance, a great hall stood, its golden gates gleaming, waiting for those who had fought and fallen for honor. Valhalla. The place of heroes, where the brave warriors were taken to live in the afterlife. But even the gods knew this was the last time they would walk the earth. Thor, his hammer heavy in his grasp, looked out across the fields where the final battles had been fought. His heart was full, yet there was a quiet sadness in his eyes. He had faced the giants, fought through storms and darkness, and yet now he was ready. His warriors were ready. They had given their all, and the time for battle had passed. There would be no more wars to fight, no more thunder to strike. The hammer would rest. Beside him, Odin stood, his one eye fixed on the horizon. His wisdom, his sacrifices, his leadership, they had shaped the world. And now, even he could feel the weight of the end. But there was no fear in his heart. He had walked this path before, seen the cycles of life and death, of war and peace. The final chapter was written, and it was time for him to return home, to join his fallen comrades in the halls of Valhalla. The Valkyries, those fierce, beautiful warriors who had watched over the battlefield, their wings spread wide, felt the pull of the eternal rest. They had guided the bravest of souls to their final resting place, carrying them from the chaos of war to the peaceful quiet of Valhalla. But now, their journey was coming to an end as well. They had served their purpose. The warriors they had fought beside, the ones they had saved, were now gone, and it was time for them to follow. The gates of Valhalla opened wide, as if welcoming them home. The golden light beckoned, a warmth that promised peace, rest, and the end of suffering. The gods and their warriors knew what awaited them beyond those gates. There would be no more fighting, no more death. There would be nothing but the company of those who had fought beside them, the warmth of the hearth, the music of victory, and the quiet joy of knowing that they had lived with honor. As they walked toward the gates, the gods and their warriors were not met with sadness, but with a profound sense of gratitude. They had lived as heroes, and now they would rest as heroes. Their names would be remembered forever, sung in the halls of Valhalla, their stories passed down through generations. The sacrifice they had made, the battles they had fought, and the lives they had touched would never be forgotten. Thor took one last look at the land, his eyes lingering on the places where battles had raged, where blood had been spilled, where heroes had fallen. And then, with a deep breath, he turned away. The halls of Valhalla awaited him. Odin, the father of all gods, walked beside him, his footsteps slow but steady. He had led them all through the darkness, and now he would join them in the light. There was no regret in his heart, no longing for the past. He had lived his life, and now he was ready to rest. The Valkyries, their wings folding gracefully behind them, followed in silence, their hearts at peace. They had seen countless heroes rise and fall, but now it was their turn to join the ranks of those who had gone before them. As they passed through the gates, the air seemed to shift. The light grew brighter, warmer, and the sounds of battle faded away completely. The clamor of war was replaced by a gentle silence, a quiet peace that wrapped around them like a comforting embrace. They had fought their final battle, and now they could rest. Inside Valhalla, the great hall awaited. It was a place of celebration, where the fallen heroes could feast and laugh, sharing their stories with those who had gone before. The gods would sit at the high tables, their warriors beside them, their spirits finally at peace. The golden halls would echo with the sounds of music and joy, not of war. But even in this moment of peace, there was a sense of finality. The gods knew that their time had come to an end. Their legacy would live on in the hearts of those who remembered their deeds, but their battle was over. And so, with heads held high, they entered the hall. The doors closed softly behind them, and the sounds of the outside world faded away completely. The last chapter had been written, and the gods had returned to where they belonged. In the distance, the stars began to twinkle in the sky, as if the heavens themselves were honoring the gods and their warriors. The moon rose high, casting a soft, silver light over the land. The world was still. It was done. The heroes had returned to Valhalla, where they would live forever in peace, their battles ended, their spirits at rest. And in the quiet of the night, the memory of their deeds would endure, a story to be told for all eternity. The battle cries that once shook the sky still echo in the hearts of those who hear the stories. From the winds that howl over the icy fjords to the pages of ancient sagas, the warriors of the North have never truly left. Their blood, their struggles, and their triumphs live on, woven into the very fabric of what it means to be Viking, to be Norse. The battles they fought weren't just for the thrill of war, nor were they simply for the glory of a fleeting moment. They were battles for legacy, for honor, and for a place in the eternal tapestry of time. When the great warriors marched off into the unknown, their fate sealed in the blood of gods and men, they did so with the knowledge that their stories would not fade with the wind. They knew that the clash of swords, the rush of battle, and the sacrifice on the field would echo across time. These were not merely legends. They were the pulse of a culture defined by its struggles, its victories, and its deep connection to the land they ruled. The gods, the warriors, and the very idea of battle itself became a part of their identity. In the silent halls of Valhalla, the gods' feasts were not only celebrations of victories won, but were also reminders of sacrifices made, of lives lost for a greater purpose. Their impact, the essence of what they stood for, never truly died. It permeated the culture, seeping into every aspect of life, from the songs sung by bards to the wars waged by those who followed their footsteps. It was the old ways, the way of the sword, the shield, and the eternal fire that burned inside every Viking heart. The ancient sagas, passed down through the generations, became the means by which the legends of gods, giants, and warriors were immortalized. The fireside tales spun in darkened halls, where men and women would listen with wide eyes, leaned in close, their hearts stirred by the stories of fierce battles and heroic deeds. The gods of Asgard were not just figures of myth, they were examples to live by. Their wisdom, their courage, and their sacrifices became the blueprint for what it meant to fight not just for survival, but for something greater: honor, respect, and a place in the afterlife. As the Viking ships cut through the mist, their sails catching the wind, the culture that had birthed these great warriors spread far beyond the icy reaches of the north. What began as stories in small villages became the stuff of legends across Europe. The impact of these warriors rippled through history, inspiring kings, poets, and warriors to reach for something more than just fame. They reached for eternity. The Norse sagas taught them that battles were not simply about defeating an enemy, they were about leaving behind a legacy that would outlast the bloodshed, that would outlast time itself. And yet, the power of these stories did not remain confined to the past. In the shadow of the medieval world, Norse mythology breathed new life in the hearts of many who longed for a connection to a distant past. The stories of Ragnarok, of the final battles and the rebirth of the world, whispered to a generation searching for something raw, something fierce, something real. The very idea of heroes, of gods and warriors fighting for a cause greater than themselves, struck a chord that transcended time. It wasn't just a history lesson, it was a call to arms, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is a place for honor, for sacrifice, for standing tall in the face of certain destruction. The lasting influence of these great battles reaches deep into the veins of modern interpretations of Norse myths. Films, books, and art have all been touched by the power of these stories, but it is more than just the visual spectacle or the grandeur of gods and monsters. It is the essence of the struggle that resonates, the fight for something pure, something meaningful. The Valkyries, who once carried fallen warriors to their final rest, continue to stand as symbols of bravery, of the eternal battle against darkness. Thor's hammer still represents the triumph of strength and will, and Odin's wisdom remains a guiding light for those who seek knowledge and guidance. But perhaps the most enduring influence lies in the hearts of those who look to these stories not just as ancient legends, but as blueprints for how to live. The Vikings, for all their fierce battles, understood that true honor came not from the victories they claimed, but from the way they faced the challenges in their lives. They fought for what they believed in, and in doing so, they showed the world that the power of a warrior was not just in their physical strength, but in their heart, their soul, and the legacy they left behind. Even today, when we face our own battles, whether they be personal, professional, or societal, the stories of these great heroes remind us of the courage required to stand tall. The Viking spirit, the Norse gods' eternal presence, is not just a relic of the past, but a guiding force for those who seek to make their mark on the world. The warriors of old may be gone, but their essence lives on in each battle we face, and each challenge we rise to meet. The gods may rest in Valhalla, but their influence is felt wherever there is a fight for something worth fighting for. In a world that often seems disconnected from the past, these stories keep the flame of battle, honor, and sacrifice burning bright. From the pages of books to the frames of films, from the hearts of modern warriors to the minds of artists and thinkers, the legacy of Norse mythology endures. The battles of the gods will never be forgotten, and neither will the heroes who fought beside them. Their courage is forever etched in the fabric of our collective imagination, their influence shaping the battles we fight today and the ones we will face tomorrow. Their final rest in Valhalla may have come, but their legacy, their story, lives on, passed down through time, generation after generation, reminding us all that the greatest battles are often those fought within.